Chapter 133. Planet X, C362, Planet Brown Earth. It was still the same as it was 3 years ago. Nothing had changed, but after seeing the prosperity of the 10 trade zones, even the most upscale district of Planet Brown Earth paled in comparison. Luxuriously dressed, pretentious upscale people could be seen everywhere on the streets, walking with arrogant eyes as usual. Guarding an inch of land and living their own lives was a joy to them. Pretty good. At least most of them were self-satisfied and happy with what they had. Old Devon had opened a small shop in the city, and had also hired people from the slums to help. He was living a good life now. Having a son in his old age, Old Devon always had a smile on his face. At least when Sillin saw him, Old Devon was always smiling happily. Tang Chiochio held a large cup of ice cream in one hand and a lollipop in the other. She ate happily, occasionally looking around curiously. Hui Mao was clamoring to take a flying car. He had originally planned to take a train, but at Hui Mao's request, Sillin took a flying car instead. He hailed a taxi, gave the destination, and the flying car rose into the air and flew away. Sillin did not allow Hui Mao to talk nonsense outside, so Hui Mao expressed all of his emotions through his round eyes. He stared unblinkingly at the flying cars in front and behind the taxi, and could not help but move his claws. There was no other way, his claws itched and he wanted to pat them. Sillin looked at the scenery outside the taxi window. This planet was still the same. If it was in the 10 trade zones, there would probably be a lot of changes every year. The development of lagging sectors was much slower. When Tang Chiochio finished the ice cream in her hand, they arrived at their destination. Although this was only the edge of the slums, they could clearly feel the great difference from the prosperous areas in front. "Brother Sillin, is this your birthplace?" Tang Chiochio asked. In her heart, there was no such thing as a hometown, only the concept of birthplace, and she had no feelings for this concept at all. "Yes." Sillin took a deep breath. The air was still a mixture of dust and decadence. Hui Mao squatted on Sillin's shoulder and snorted occasionally. It was obvious that Hui Mao despised this place. Especially since he had just come from the bustling city center, the contrast was even more obvious. He really didn't expect Sillin to be born in such a broken place. The poor houses were still the same, and the garbage dump was still the same. However, there were fewer people and there were more abandoned houses. Walking along the familiar street, he came to the door of a bar. This was the bar that old David had given to Sillin. It was also the small shop that Sillin had worked in for many years. Before he left, he had sublet it to Cheng, who used to live in the same slum. Sillin had checked the original savings card. For the past 3 years, Carrie would have an extra sum of money every year, and it was always on time. Although this amount of money was nothing to Sillin, it was enough to show Cheng's character. Sillin was very satisfied. Cheng's brother, De Cheng, used to live in the slums as well. However, De Cheng was ruthless and risked his life to work in a high-radiation area. Unexpectedly, his genotype evolved from rank F to rank E, and he officially stepped into the city. However, Cheng didn't have the guts. He was satisfied as long as he could live peacefully. That was why when Sillin rented the bar to Cheng, he was very happy. Now, it seemed that Cheng had been living well for the past 3 years. Sillin was no longer the same as he was 3 years ago. No one could recognize him. The shop's business wasn't good, but it was passable. Sillin didn't stay at the bar for long. Instead, he went to Jenya's house. The AI robots had been taking care of the house, so it wasn't very dirty. The Fuji tree hadn't grown at all, and it looked exactly the same as it did 3 years ago. After looking around, Sillin contacted an intermediary and bought the abandoned houses. He sent the blueprints to them and asked them to build according to the blueprints. At the same time, Sillin transferred all the money to them and even paid a little more. The intermediary was very happy and promised that they would do a good job. Sillin used another identity to go through the relevant procedures. After obtaining the ownership of the houses, he left the rest of the matters to the intermediary. They would supervise the completion. Sillin had savings on hand, and they were all galactic credits, which could be exchanged for even more sector credits. He wouldn't mind even if he had to buy the entire slums. However, Sillin chose to let this slum town develop on its own. He didn't want to interrupt this town's pace. Sillin also learned some things. The reason why there were fewer people here was mainly because of the chain reaction brought about by a newly developed planet, Planet X, C369, not far from Planet X, C362. Planet X, C369 was originally a planet that was much poorer than Planet Brown Saturn. It was much more backward, and this planet's habitability was only grade B. In other words, if one wanted to migrate to Planet X, C369, they would need more facilities to support it. These facilities would cost a lot of money, and this was also the reason why no one had paid attention to this planet for so many years. However, 3 years ago, not long after Sillin left Planet Brown Saturn, Planet X, C369 was inadvertently spotted by an investigator from the Phoenix family, a famous family in the League of Stars. The investigator obtained the rights to develop and manage the planet, and thus the planet's fate changed from then on. It was named Little Garden. Little Garden was twice the size of Planet Brown Earth. Its development required a large amount of labor, and the one thing Sector X did not lack the least was cheap labor. Planet Brown Earth, which was relatively close to Little Garden, provided almost 1/5 of the total labor force. Of course, these labor forces were of higher quality, and even the lowest genotype was ranky. Since Planet Brown Earth had lost a large amount of labor force from the city center, it gave the people of the slums a chance. Some of the strong and healthy F-rank genotypes were able to find a job at the city center of Planet Brown Earth, and that was why the slum population was decreasing. In just a year's time, Planet X, C369, which was originally in an almost primitive state, had changed greatly. It truly lived up to its name, becoming a beautiful and colorful garden. Right now, Little Garden had become famous in Sector X thanks to the Phoenix family's promotion. Moreover, it had become one of the more important tourist planets under the Phoenix family. Every day, people from all over the League of Stars would come to visit due to its fame. Do you want to take a look at Little Garden? Sillin asked Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao while holding a flyer for Little Garden. Yes. They answered in unison, looking very expectant. The image on the flyer was too attractive. All right, then our next stop will be Little Garden. Let's take a look at the legendary Sea of Flowers. There was a direct flight to Little Garden on Planet Brown Saturn, but Sillin had already applied for a pet certificate for Hui Mao. The inspection station outside of Little Garden was under stricter management, and while it was possible to sneak past it, Hui Mao would still have to come out once he reached the planet. In order to prevent more problems from happening in the future, Sillin decided to apply for a pet certificate without hesitation. However, the word pet caused Hui Mao to grit his teeth. He thought for a moment and decided to forget about it. He wouldn't stay in the designated pet cabin for too long anyway. He would arrive after a nap. Little Garden? That sounds pretty good. Chapter 134. Everyone knew that Little Garden wasn't small at all. It was twice the size of Planet Brown Earth, but there was an endless stream of people coming and going on this planet every day. The entire Little Garden planet was practically filled with people. The Phoenix family's businesses were relatively strict in all aspects. The direct passenger planes stopped at the spaceport outside of Little Garden. Similar to Seven Lights University, the passengers had their identities checked at the spaceport before boarding a specialized carrier plane to enter the planet. Before they even entered the spaceport, the passengers on the passenger plane began to get excited. The colorful and dreamy planet could be seen from the cabin windows and display screens. It was truly fascinating. After the checks were done, Sillin led Tang Qiuqiu into the specialized carrier plane. As for Hui Mao, it continued to squat in the pet cabin of the carrier plane. The moment they landed and stepped out of the carrier plane, the fragrance of flowers assaulted their nostrils. It was rich but not cloying, but the moment they walked out of the port, the fragrance changed. It became simple, elegant, fresh, and pleasant. The moment they stepped out of the carrier plane, the fragrance of flowers changed almost every few steps they took. There were all kinds of scents, and flower beds of all sizes and shapes could be seen everywhere. There were even some vine-like flowers hanging in the air. That was so suffocating. Hui Mao shook its fur, raised its butt and stretched its back before jumping onto Silin's shoulder. Its cat head twisted and turned continuously as it looked at the surrounding scenery in astonishment. On this planet, be it the buildings or the means of transportation, they were all in the shape of flowers or carved with flower patterns. They inherited the diversity of flowers and filled this planet with the dreamy colors of a fairy tale. Silin was going to rent a means of transportation, a flower car. This was an indispensable tool for the tourists who came here. It looked like a small carriage, except it was in the shape of a flower. There were tables and chairs inside, and the tourists could sit on it to eat, drink, chat and admire the flowers. The speed, route and so on could all be adjusted. It was very convenient. When they arrived at the flower car rental point, Silin looked at the display screen and asked Tang Kikikyu, "Which one do you want?" There were all kinds of flower cars on the screen, and it was dazzling. Tang Qiuqiu pursed her lips and looked at them for a long time. In the end, she chose the Lily of the Valley car. The flower car was like Lily of the Valley, white and bell-shaped. It was very cute. Since there were only 2 people and a cat, Silin chose a small flower car. After paying, a card popped up next to the machine. It was the proof of rental and the key to the flower car. At the same time, a 2-meter-tall Lily of the Valley car automatically drove out of the station. After scanning the card on the door of the flower car opened, and the fragrance of Lily of the Valley wafted out. After entering the float and setting up the control panel, 3 sofa chairs and a small round table popped out. The chairs were soft and looked like they were sitting on the petals of a lily of the valley. Silin had set up a short route. First, he had to go to a few nearby shops to buy some food and other necessities. Tang Kikikyu bought ice cream and candy, Huimao's codfish burger and fish biscuits of various flavors, and Silin also bought some food to fill their stomachs. One had to admit that the service at the place managed by the Feniers family was pretty good. The quality of the food was also very good, and it wasn't too expensive. Silin even bought a palm-sized, flower-shaped camera for Tang Kikikyu to play with. The 2 people and the cat took a photo as a memento. The Lily of the Valley car floated on the passage. Silin had set the speed and route. Right now, all they had to do was sit in the car and eat, chat, and admire the scenery outside. 80% of Little Garden was a scenic area, which was enough for the tourists to see. There were intersecting floating passages in the scenic area. After the parade route was set, the float car would drive on these passages and bring the tourists to enjoy the scenery. Although they had felt that there were flowers everywhere before, it was only after entering the scenic area that they deeply felt like they had entered a sea of flowers. As far as the eye could see, there was an endless sea of flowers. Above the sea of flowers, there were some butterfly bees flying around. Butterfly bees looked a lot like butterflies. They had large, colorful wings, but lived like bees. They would collect nectar, but they wouldn't harm the garden like butterfly larvae. The manager of Little Garden had even specially built some beehives for them. All kinds of butterfly bees danced among the flowers, adding a lot of liveliness to the sea of flowers. The colorful world, the overwhelming scenery, and the refreshing fragrance of flowers all caused one to stop and linger in their tracks. The scenery at every stop was different. Even though the previous stop was already eye-catching enough, they didn't expect to see something else at the next stop. It was hard to comment. There was a monitor in the float car that would display the information of the area it passed, the types of flowers, the names of the scenic area, and so on, so that the tourists could better understand it. Rainbow Bridge. Big Brother Silin, let's go through Rainbow Bridge. Silin adjusted the route, and the float car drove toward Rainbow Bridge. Tourists who came here would adjust their route to pass through Rainbow Bridge. Rainbow Bridge was an arched passage surrounded by flowers of 7 colors. From a distance, it looked like a rainbow. At the same time, there were some special suspension devices floating above and around Rainbow Bridge. They were all white like clouds, and water droplets sprayed from them, adding a bit of fun. The children passing by stretched their hands out of the window to catch the water droplets. Tang Qiuqiu was no exception. She could hear their laughter from afar. Tang Qiuqiu also carried Hui Mao out of the window and drenched him with water droplets. Hui Mao was also having fun. He shook his ears and shook his head, throwing water droplets on Tang Qiuqiu. He opened his mouth to drink water, and the water droplets that sprayed out had the sweetness of nectar. Wow, look, there's a cat. On a float car in front, a 4 or 5-year-old child poked his head out and smiled, pointing at Hui Mao, who Tang Qiuqiu carried out of the window. The gray cat even waved its paw in the direction of the little fellow, causing the little fellow in front of it to become incredibly excited. The little fellow tossed a bag of fish fillets at the gray cat, and the gray cat caught it with its paw before smiling so widely that its eyes turned into crescents. After passing Rainbow Bridge, a huge figure appeared in the sea of flowers, Flower Goddess, a figure made entirely of flowers. The girl made of flowers looked very demure. White flowers formed the wings on her back, and a long skirt decorated with flowers of various colors. In this sea of flowers, there was a feeling of strolling in a courtyard, very beautiful. Tang Qiuqiu was holding the camera and taking pictures. Silin poked her little face and said, "Qiuqiu, there's honey over there. Do you want to try it?" "Sugar?" Tang Qiuqiu's eyes lit up. She looked in the direction that Silin was pointing. Not far ahead, there was a small shop that sold honey and other nectar. Nectar and flower tea were all specialties of Little Garden. After all, in the League of Stars, it was very difficult to find a place that was better than here. In this kind of pure environment, the quality of the nectar in Little Garden was also very good. Needless to say, the honey they made was naturally very good. Looking at the information on the menu, Tang Qiuqiu bit her finger. It was really too difficult to choose. In the end, she temporarily chose 10 types of honey and would buy them when she encountered such a shop in the future. After buying the sweets, Silin decided to rest at a stop. There was a plaza here, and tourists could park their float cars here and walk out to get some fresh air. Tang Qiuqiu sat on a flower-shaped wooden stool and showed Silin the scenery that she had taken along the way. Just as she was talking, she was interrupted by a young and angry roar. "Get lost!" Chapter 135. This roar attracted the attention of all the tourists around them. They saw a flying car with a unique design hovering in the air. Below the flying car were a few bodyguard-like figures, as well as an old man dressed meticulously like an official surrounding a boy around 10 years old. The old man had a helpless look on his face, but he didn't look annoyed. Instead, his eyes were filled with love. Silin knew that people who could use a flying car in a place like this were definitely not ordinary tourists. After all, the management of this planet was rather strict. It seemed that this group of people had quite a background. Even if they weren't from the Feniers family, they were at least closely related to the Feniers family. The one who yelled, "Get lost," just now was that young master. Just by looking at his attire, one could tell that he was definitely the young master of some family. Moreover, the way that little guy looked at the people around him with disdain and arrogance in his eyes made Silin think that he was pride. The little guy's face was filled with anger at the moment. One of the bodyguards moved a step to the side and was glared at by the little guy. The bodyguard had no choice but to retract his foot and stand still like a statue. This was clearly the temper of a young master. It did look a little unreasonable. You just told him to get lost just now, but you got glared at right after you moved a step. What are you trying to do? He didn't know what the surrounding tourists were thinking, but at least Tang Qiuqiu couldn't stand it. However, she couldn't be bothered. She nudged Hui Mao with her elbow and pointed at an image displayed on the camera. "Ignore them. Let's continue watching. Wheeze, what do you think of this one?" The image was taken by Silin when they were crossing the Rainbow Bridge. Tang Qiuqiu pushed Hui Mao out of the car window, and the scattered water droplets reflected a rainbow of colors. Hui Mao moved closer to the other side, and his entire head blocked the image. Obviously, he liked this image very much. "You're blocking me. Move to the side a little." Tang Qiuqiu scratched the fur on Hui Mao's head with a smile. In fact, after the young master shouted just now, the surrounding people unconsciously became silent or only whispered to each other. Therefore, Tang Qiuqiu's voice, which was not suppressed at all, seemed a little abrupt. At the same time, It was obvious that Tang Kakikyu had completely ignored everyone else and was talking to Huimao. The young master glared at Tang Qiuqiu, but both Tang Qiuqiu and Huimao were staring at the camera and completely ignored his gaze. The young master was so angry that his face turned red. He had never met someone who ignored him like this. This was simply unforgivable. Bastard. Although it was only 2 words, these 2 words were sonorous and powerful. It was even more imposing than the previous scram. He really deserved to be the young master of a big family. The surrounding people sighed in their hearts. However, it was a pity for the little girl. These people didn't seem to be easy to deal with. Everyone looked at Tang Qiuqiu with sympathy. Silin had been observing the old man. Although it seemed that the bodyguards were looking at the young master, the real person in charge was the old man who looked like a butler. However, the good thing was that the old man didn't show any malice. Hearing the young master's rather imposing roar, Tang Qiuqiu raised her head and glanced at him. The meaning of that glance was obvious. Don't shout, don't disturb us from watching the video. Tang Qiuqiu's obviously disdainful glance made the young master's face turn from red to black. He was so angry that he almost jumped up. However, slowly, the child seemed to have thought of something and his anger slowly subsided. Instead, he had a strange and malicious smile. The old man next to him raised his eyebrows. He had a bad feeling. The little young master raised his chin high and put on the airs of a young master as he walked step by step towards Tang Qiuqiu. At the same time, following the little fellow's movements, the few bodyguards and the old man also followed closely beside him. Seeing that Tang Qiuqiu and Huimao still treated him as heir, the young master raised an arrogant smile and raised his finger to Tang Qiuqiu opposite him. He said to the old man next to him, "Don't you need bodyguards? She's the one." Tang Qiuqiu turned off the camera, took out a honey candy and put it in her mouth. She jumped off the wooden stool and took Silin's hand. "Let's go. We've rested well. Let's continue to enjoy the flowers." She didn't want to talk to this crazy young master. "Stop." Following the boy's voice, a few bodyguards blocked the path in front of Silin and Tang Qiuqiu. Silin stopped Tang Qiuqiu from kicking him and looked at the old man. The old man gave him an apologetic look and stepped forward to introduce himself without losing decorum. "My name is Costella, and this is my family's young master. I wonder if I might have the honor of treating the 2 of you to afternoon tea?" Tang Qiuqiu looked at Silin. She knew that she couldn't speak carelessly in a situation like this. The other party was going to use force. Silin looked at the old man and said with a smile, "Then I'll have to trouble you." When Costella introduced himself just now, he deliberately revealed a symbol on his sleeve. It was the emblem of the Feniers family. Since the other party didn't make things ugly and offered a ladder for you to step down, wouldn't it be the same as forcing the other party to throw a tantrum if you didn't step down? Moreover, this planet was the Feniers family's territory to begin with. Even if they wanted to make trouble, they wouldn't go so far as to offend the local bully. Silin believed that the old man in front of him wouldn't go so far as to deal with them just because of this. Therefore, Silin agreed to Costella's suggestion. The little boy looked at Tang Qiuqiu smugly and beckoned for the flying car, which had stopped in the air, to descend. This flying car was very big, about the same size as a large flower car. However, the interior was much more luxurious. Silin and Tang Qiuqiu went inside and sat down. Huimao jumped into Tang Qiuqiu's arms and allowed Tang Qiuqiu to tickle it. The bodyguards took their seats at the back and front. There were only 4 people in the middle. Silin and Tang Qiuqiu sat opposite the young master and Costella. Tang Qiuqiu didn't give the person opposite her a friendly look. She merely looked at Huimao in her arms and scratched its chin. The flying car rose into the air and stopped after flying for a short distance. A small tea table popped up in the middle of the room. Costella picked up the teapot and poured 4 cups of tea. Costella was the first to state that this was a misunderstanding. He had no choice but to bring Silin and Tang Qiuqiu up here. After all, it wouldn't be good for their reputation if they continued to cause trouble down there. Secondly, Costella expressed that this young master's suggestion was also a misunderstanding. However, before he could finish speaking, the young master forcefully interrupted Costella's words. I said, let her be a bodyguard. Didn't you say yesterday that you wanted to add more bodyguards? Just nice, let's use her. Tang Qiuqiu had a strange expression on her face. She moved closer to Silin's ear and whispered, Big Brother Xiaoshang once said that those who let a woman protect are all gigolos who live off women. Although Tang Qiuqiu's voice wasn't loud, Castella and the young master would definitely be able to hear her since they were so close. Tang Qiuqiu didn't intend to hide it from them in the first place. She was purposely letting the young master hear her. The old man didn't have much of a reaction, but the young master was infuriated. He slammed his palm on the tea table in front of him. Who do you think you are? Letting you be my bodyguard is already an honor for you. How dare you mock me? A brat who doesn't know anything. You're not even as tall as me, shorty. Gigolo. Ugly freak. Silin and the old man watched as their children slammed the table and glared at each other, arguing until spittle flew everywhere. Both of them remained calm and said nothing. Bang. Tang Qiuqiu slammed her fist on the table and gritted her teeth. She wanted nothing more than to send this annoying bastard flying with a kick. She used to do whatever she wanted in Sector V in the past, and there were plenty of times when she would be served with a gun at the slightest disagreement. But after joining the 6th Division, she had toned down a lot. Still, this guy in front of her really pissed her off. Tang Qiuqiu turned around and asked Silin, according to the rules, I can accept missions during my free time, right? Silin thinks for a moment. Sure. All right. Tang Qiuqiu looked at the brat in front of her. If the pay is good and it's within my free time, then I'll accept the mission to protect you, gigolo. The young master looked at Tang Qiuqiu disdainfully. How much pay can someone like you be worth? You overestimate yourself. I might as well hire someone from the Big Four. The Big Four referred to the 4 great hunter regiments. Tang Qiuqiu paused for a moment. She seemed to be hesitating about something. Silin took a sip of tea and said, Go. I'll be at the back if anything happens. The corner of Tang Qiuqiu's lips curled when she heard Silin's words. She fished out the item hanging around her neck and slapped it on the table. I am Tang Qiuqiu, a member of the 6th Division of the Vanguard of the Big Four hunter regiments. Gigolo young master, may I know the price of the Big Four's hunter rewards? Chapter 136. Looking at the dagger-shaped emblem with a 6 on it that Tang Qiuqiu had slapped on the table, even Castella was a little stunned, much less this young master. He couldn't tell that it was actually one of the Great Four. Naturally, Castella could tell whether the emblem was real or fake. That was why he was surprised that Vanguard actually had such a young hunter. Moreover, with Castella's knowledge, he could tell from the emblem that this little girl was a core member of the B Squadron. Vanguard Division 6. This is fake, right? The young master's face was red as he roared angrily, but it was obvious that his kidneys were lacking. Tang Qiuqiu let out a oof and put the emblem back on her neck. She carried Hui Mao back onto her lap, scratched Hui Mao's chin and said, Some people just can't take a loss, can they? Hui Mao narrowed his eyes and gave face by meowing. The young master was so angry that he almost flipped the table. Castella straightened his expression. My apologies. So you're Vanguard's hunters. I hope you won't blame me for my slight neglect just now. Actually, with Castella's identity, there was no need for him to be so polite to the hunters of 2B squadrons, even if they were members of one of the Great Four, Vanguard. However, the main reason Castella was acting this way was because of the 6 on Tang Qiuqiu's emblem. Vanguard Division 6. He had recently received many secret reports regarding this B squadron, and according to his understanding, this B squadron had a strong momentum to rise. Since you're hunters of Vanguard, then I need to reintroduce myself. This is my young master, Fenir's Tobo, and I'm his servant. Welcome to Fenir's little garden. Since Castella said that he would reintroduce himself, it meant that it was time for Silin to introduce himself. Sir Silin put down his teacup and took out his own emblem. Vice Commander of Vanguard Division 6, Silin. Sorry for the interruption. Castella's eyelids twitched. Vice Commander. This young man in front of him was actually the Vice Commander of Vanguard Division 6. Now, Castella really had to admit that he was blind. Such a young vice-captain and such a young member were truly astonishing. The flying car left the scenic area and landed at a manor. This was the Feniers family's private lodging area. Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao were sitting in a reception room. The servants brought out all kinds of pastries. Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao ate happily, completely ignoring Tobo, who had a cold expression on his face. Sillin and Castella went to another meeting hall. Castella told Sillin about the mission this time, and at the same time, explained the relevant issues. The Feniers family's young master, Tobo, was bored at home, and he just so happened to hear that a group of people from the family were heading to Sector X's Little Garden for supervision work. Therefore, he asked his parents to agree to accompany them to Little Garden to relax. Since the young master was going on a journey, it was only natural that the security work had to be done well. There were even a few corvettes, but not long after they arrived at Little Garden, they received a request for help from another of the family's properties in Sector X. Half of the bodyguards had gone over to support them, but the number of bodyguards was insufficient. The young master had also grown tired of playing here, and the personnel who were transferred away had not returned even when the original return time arrived. For the sake of Tobo's safety, Castella did not act according to Tobo's wishes. If they were to leave and return now, the accompanying bodyguards would be insufficient, and it would be easy for something to happen. As for the reason why Tobo was angry earlier, it was because he did not have the patience to stay here any longer. In a fit of pique, he took the float out to relax. In the end, he was still annoyed by the bodyguards around him, and that was why he started yelling at the resting plaza. "Do you think that there's something fishy going on here?" Sillin asked. "Indeed." Castella did not try to hide it either. "You know that many children of big families have experienced being held hostage or kidnapped, let alone a big family like the Feniers family. Those who have the guts to act are all strong, and they are not easy to deal with. Not to mention that they are hiding in the dark." Of course, Sillin, who had once worked with the heir of the Duance family, Aflon, understood the twists and turns in this matter. Otherwise, Aflon would not have asked Sillin to pretend to be his son back then. As far as I know, a big family at the level of the Feniers family would protect their young children very well. But why did they take the risk and agree to let little young Master Tobo come to Sector X from Sector F? The distance between Sector F and Sector X could be considered to be quite far. Even if something were to happen, distant waters would not be able to put out a nearby fire. Moreover, Tobo was still young. He was only 10 years old. He did not even have much ability to protect himself. Castella smiled proudly when he heard this. The Feniers family places great importance on the safety of their children, but the process of growth is just as important. The people of the Feniers family cannot be afraid of things, and they cannot give up just because there is danger. They need to train, and this age is also the best time to broaden their horizons. Sillin nodded in agreement. It was true that if they were kept in a greenhouse, they would either grow up to be a prodigal or a man who lived off a woman. Take Lung, Ci Jincheng, Knight and the others for example. Which one of them did not have a deep background, but their individual strength was also extremely strong. This was inseparable from their own training. Giving might not necessarily bring about rewards, but wanting to reap rewards without giving was bullshit. "How long does the mission last?" Sillin asked. "If those bodyguards still don't return after 3 days, we will immediately leave and return to Sector F. The mission will end when we arrive safely at Sector F. All right, but I must make something clear first. Tang Qiuqiu is the only one who has accepted this mission. As for me, I have no choice. My own child needs to grow up, so I have to keep an eye on her." The reason Sillin did not interfere with Tang Qiuqiu's actions was because he wanted to give Tang Qiuqiu some experience. As a hunter, she would accept free missions sooner or later. Since Sillin did not participate in this mission directly, Castella only had to pay Tang Qiuqiu for the mission reward. The base reward was 1 million, and another 1 million would be paid after the mission was successful. Originally, Castella had only prepared a base reward of 500,000, but when he saw Tang Qiuqiu blow up a butterfly bee outside the manor with a raise of her hand after receiving a gun, he raised the price without hesitation. Castella sighed. As expected of someone from the vanguard. This girl's gun sense was just too good. She did not need to take time to aim. She fired the gun at the first moment she felt it. She did not even need to look at the result to know that she had hit the target. Food and lodging were included during the mission. For Tang Qiuqiu, who had accepted a free mission for the first time, this was indeed a huge sum of money. Tang Qiuqiu felt as if the road ahead was filled with honey. Although she was excited, she still had to read the agreement seriously. Diaz had said that she could not be careless with the agreement. If someone were to take advantage of a loophole, then she would not be able to do anything about it even if she cried when the time came. After she felt that there were no mistakes, she signed the agreement and officially began the mission. Tang Qiuqiu signed the mission agreement, while Silin signed a different agreement. He had to abide by some of the rules of not participating in the mission. At night, Silin lay on the bed while Hui Mao lay next to him. Because of the mission, Tang Qiuqiu slept in the room next to Tobo's bedroom. Silin, why did this coconut silk family or whatever let Qiuqiu be that young master's bodyguard? Wouldn't it be better to hire someone more capable? Hui Mao wagged his tail from time to time. A big family like the Fenier's family usually wouldn't hire a hunter as their bodyguard. They trust the people they nurture more, so that old fox Castella must have some reason that he didn't tell us. Still, no matter what, this is a pretty good growth experience for Qiuqiu, said Silin. That's true. Besides, Qiuqiu can get 2 million for this mission. She said she'll treat me to a fish feast when the time comes, hee. Go to sleep, foodie. You can even taste a fish feast in your dreams. Hui Mao snorted twice, curled his body into a ball, and hugged his head as he slept. In the middle of the night, Silin opened his palm and a few flying insects flew out. Silin looked at the direction they were flying in, and with a wave of his hand, he put them away again. Chapter 137. Although everyone knew that Tang Qiuqiu had become young Master Tobo's personal bodyguard, they treated it like a child throwing a tantrum. The fact that Silin and Tang Qiuqiu were part of Vanguard's 6th Division was only known by Castella and a few others. In the few days before he left Little Garden, the young master was still bored. Since he had a new bodyguard, he brought Tang Qiuqiu, the little bodyguard, out for a stroll. Silin and the other bodyguards followed them not far away. Sitting in the small flower car, Silin and Hui Mao were playing chess. Since Hui Mao had seen the Miantuan and Yudi playing chess before, he got excited and wanted to play a few rounds with Silin. It had to be said that since he was a cyborg, he had powerful computing abilities, so he was pretty good at chess. However, it was not enough to play chess with powerful computing abilities alone. In comparison, Silin's mind was more flexible than Hui Mao's, so Hui Mao was always in a passive state. Beep. Hui Mao lowered his head and stared at the chessboard for a long time before he shamelessly pressed the reset button. He lost again. Silin looked out the window and ignored Hui Mao, who was rolling on the table. Hui Mao rolled back and forth on the table, groaning for a long time. When he saw that Silin was ignoring him, he raised his paw and hooked Silin's sleeve. Ignored. Hooked again. Still ignored. Hui Mao was angry after a long time without any results. He even vented his resentment for losing the game. He leaped, jumped onto Silin's head, and started ruining his hairstyle. Silin raised his hand and flicked Hui Mao's head, then pointed outside the window. Look over there. Hui Mao spat out the hair in his mouth and looked in the direction Silin's finger was pointing. There were people in wedding dresses taking videos. There were often newlyweds coming from afar to take videos. There was nothing special about it. He had seen many of them since the first day. What's so good about taking wedding photos? Could it be that Silin wants to get married? If you want to get married, you have to find a rich, beautiful, fertile, and not a prodigal. That's what Carrie said. I'll ask him when I see him. Silin pulled Hui Mao's ear. You're so stupid. Who said that? What's that? The place you're talking about is the wedding photo shoot. The gray cat patted Silin's forehead in dissatisfaction. Let's test your eyesight. Silin pointed to the person who was taking pictures of the wedding dress. With the place where the bride is standing as the center and a radius of 100 meters, how many butterfly bees are there in this circular area? 169. Hui Mao answered almost immediately. Among them, 132 are carbon-based creatures and 37 are mechanical camouflage. After a pause, Hui Mao continued, among the 37 mechanical camouflage bees, 7 are monitoring the few people taking the wedding photo, 10 are monitoring the surroundings, including us, and 20 are facing the direction of Tang Kikikyu and young Master Tubu. With just a glance, Hui Mao could distinguish the butterfly bees that looked the same to others. Although the disguised mechanical butterfly bees were fine with the other butterfly bees beside them, in Hui Mao's eyes, there was a world of difference between carbon-based creatures and mechanical objects. He could tell with just a glance. There were no surveillance devices installed in the floats. It seemed like the Fenier's family was very concerned about the privacy of their passengers, but in reality, they had other ways to monitor them. Not bad. Not bad. Sillin nodded. Of course. Look at who's doing it, Sillin interrupted Hui Mao's self-improvement. Then have you noticed which mechanical camouflage bees have microweapon systems? Hui Mao's ears twitched and he jumped from Sillin's head to the table. If one paid attention to Hui Mao's eyes, one would notice that his pupils were greatly dilated as he looked out the window. Call monitoring, communication monitoring, gene level analysis, laser scanning, high-density energy stimulation beam. Hui Mao listed a few of the systems on the camouflage butterfly bees. Meow, there's even a self-destruct mechanism. Hui Mao's beard moved as he looked at Sillin. I wouldn't have known if I didn't look. Other than the camouflage mechanical butterfly bees, there are also many mechanical camouflage bees in the flowers and underground soil. I just saw a mechanical camouflage earthworm and a few mechanical ants. Don't they have too many spies? Doesn't this mean that our every move is being monitored? That's true. The Fenier's family has a lot of protective surveillance, but it's not necessarily a bad thing for us. Sillin tugged at Hui Mao's beard. What did you see? That's right. Although there were mechanical camouflage bees everywhere monitoring everyone's every move, it was also a lot more convenient for Hui Mao. This was because he could see the surveillance feed of these camouflage bees without being discovered by the Fenier's family. Whoa meow, they're actually kissing in public. Hui Mao yelled. In another float 50 meters away from the one Sillin was sitting on, a young couple was having sex. Originally, it couldn't be seen from the perspective of Sillin's float, but Hui Mao saw it through the surveillance feed of the camouflage butterfly bee. The young couple didn't think that anyone would notice their actions. Although they couldn't see anyone else from the window, their every move was still known by certain people. Yo, that girl's skirt has a slit. Seeing that Hui Mao was becoming more and more frivolous, Sillin slapped him. Look at how Qiuqiu and the others are doing. Qiuqiu is playing a game. That young Master Tubu is slamming the table. He looks very angry and is even yelling loudly, but Qiuqiu is ignoring him. In another float not far away, Costella and a person who looked like a bodyguard were sitting inside. Is everything ready? Costella asked with his eyes half closed. Everything is ready. However, according to the information we received, there might be some movement on the other side. Isn't this too risky? After all, the young master is following us. Costella sighed. There's no other way. This is the old man's wish. We can only do our best. If we don't run into the people on the other side and everything goes smoothly, of course, that's a good thing. If we do run into them, we can only do our best to keep the young master away from danger. Please don't worry. We will definitely do our best to protect the young master. However, the people from Vanguard, you don't have to worry about that. I have my own plans. Under young Master Tobo's repeated urging, Costella finally ordered his subordinates to prepare to depart. This time, they were escorted by 3 corvettes on their return journey. Although it was not as impressive as when they had first arrived, it was still considered a large scale compared to the others. The 3 corvettes formed a triangle around the starship that Tobo was on. Sillin was also on this starship. However, in order to avoid arousing suspicion and to abide by certain terms of the agreement, Sillin and Tang Qiuqiu did not have much contact during this period of time. After all, Sillin did not directly accept this protection mission. Tang Qiuqiu continued to play with her game console every day. As for Tobo, because he lost to Tang Qiuqiu in a shooting competition, he had been practicing his marksmanship on the starship. However, no matter how much he practiced, Tang Qiuqiu only had one sentence to say: "Stupid as hell." She had completely copied Silin's evaluation of Hui Mao and the tone of voice when she spoke. The 4 starships did not run into any accidents along the way. It was fairly peaceful, and their next destination was not Sector F. Instead, it was Sector H that they would pass through halfway. There was a Phoenier's family branch base there, and it was also the administrative center of the entire Sector H. Costella said that he had received orders to go there and would be delayed for 2 or 3 days. However, young Master Tobo did not lose his temper. In fact, he was quite happy. What was the most famous thing in Sector H? Seafood. Chapter 138. There weren't many habitable planets in Sector H, but most of the planets in this region were special. Almost all of the habitable planets had more than 50% seawater, and some of the planets with rank B habitability had seawater covering almost 100% of their surface area. That was why Sector H was also called the Blue Sector. When Silin was strolling around Seven Lights Business District, he had seen a lot of marine products brought over from Sector H. He had to admit that Sector H's marine products were better than the other sectors. Therefore, there were many business groups or great families who would obtain the development and management rights of a certain planet after they had set their eyes on it. They would use it to breed marine products and so on. The Phoenier's family was one of them. Silin flipped through the planet introductions on the electronic star map and saw a couple of familiar planets. For example, the one called Planet Aquamarine. That planet was Seven Lights' internship planet. However, Planet Aquamarine was a little far from the planet they were going to, so they probably wouldn't run into anyone from Seven Lights. The planet they were going to this time was Sector H's planet Zafia. This planet was the central management planet of the Phoenier's family's business in the entire Sector H. Zafia? Sapphire? Silin had read Sector H's sector language before he came here, so he understood a little about it. Zafia meant sapphire in Sector H's sector language. The name alone was enough to tell how important this planet was. Unlike the other foreign starships, the 4 starships did not need to undergo safety checks at the spaceport. After they stopped at the spaceport and docked with the space station, a specialized spaceplane would escort Tobo and the others into the planet. At the same time, there were many escort spaceplanes and fighters that came out of the spaceport accompanying them. At the same time, their landing spot was different from the other foreign spaceplanes. They landed at a special landing spot, and there were already people waiting around the landing spot on the ground. Silin was a little speechless as he looked at the formation around the spaceplanes. They needed to hire bodyguards for this kind of formation? But if they really needed bodyguards, then the ones who would be taking action would be their internal personnel. Otherwise, with the Phoenier's family's personality, how would outsiders even have the chance to approach them? Tobo, my dear little nephew, it's a pleasure to see you again. A dignified middle-aged man walked over with a kind smile and picked Tobo up. However, his beloved nephew didn't have a good expression on his face. He pushed away the stubbled mouth and said, "Second uncle, you haven't shaved yet." Kirk smiled and tossed Tobo into the air twice before putting him down. Tobo was obviously used to this kind of greeting, so he just kept silent with a long face. After putting Tobo down, Kirk nodded at Costella. "You've worked hard." Costella, on the other hand, was well-mannered. He bowed and said, "This is what I should do." The person Tobo called second uncle was called Phoenier's Kirk. He was the #1 administrator of Planet Zafia and the CEO of the Phoenier's family in Sector H. Silin had searched for some information regarding the Phoenier's family at Sector H before he came here. Phoenier's Kirk appeared quite frequently in some business magazines with high contribution points. Right now, Phoenier's Kirk wasn't as sharp as he appeared on the magazine. He looked a lot gentler, but this was only when he was facing Tobo and Costella. Kirk's gaze when he looked at other people might not be as sharp, but it was still imposing and intimidating. It gave people the feeling of stopping at the sight of him. As the CEO of a family's business management in a major sector, It could be seen just how important Kirk's position in the Feniers family was. However, even the CEO of a major sector did not put on any airs in front of Castella. In fact, he was mostly respectful. This was something that Sillin could see very clearly. It seemed that Castella's position in the Feniers family wasn't simple. Who's this little girl? Tobo, you're already flirting outside at such a young age. As expected of your father's son. Kirk winked at Tobo. Tobo's father was famous for his philandering ways before he got married. Tobo's face was red from holding back. Who would fall for an ugly freak with a bad temper? Of course not. She's very cute. I think she's much prettier than some family's little princess. She also has my favorite blue eyes. As for her bad temper, that was even more out of the question. Who would have a worse temper than a young master like you? However, Kirk did not say this out loud. If he did, Tobo would definitely explode on the spot. However, when Kirk looked at Tang Kakikiu playfully, this CEO of a major sector couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. When Kirk looked over, Tang Kakikiu also looked at him. However, what surprised Kirk was that Tang Chiochio's gaze was too emotionless. It didn't look like something a girl of her age should have at all. Normally, a girl of her age would be shy, angry, and awkward after hearing Kirk's teasing, wouldn't she? Although Kirk did not feel any killing intent from Tang Chiochio, he felt that if the environment was different and the scene was different, this little girl might just pull out a gun and shoot him with an expressionless face. A sense of uneasiness that shouldn't appear on a little girl of her age caused Kirk's eyes to flash for a moment. He straightened his body and swept his surroundings once. Kirk's gaze paused on Sillin for a moment before he withdrew his gaze. During this process, Kirk and Castella had exchanged a brief look with each other. They didn't need to say much to know what the other wanted to express with just a look, and it also meant that the two were very familiar with each other. Sillin's first feeling was that Kirk wasn't their target, and that he wasn't the one who was going to attack Tobo. His second feeling was that the person who was going to attack Tobo was definitely on this planet. Then, as the Feniers family's headquarters in Sector H, who was the person who would choose to attack here? But Huimao wasn't in the mood to pay attention to these things. After he exited the spaceplane, he kept taking deep breaths. There was the smell of the sea in the air, and there was also the smell of fish within it. This was truly a heavenly place. Kirk brought Tobo and the others to his private residence. It was also a large manor, and although it wasn't as colorful as the manor in Little Garden, it was still a refreshing sight to behold. There were all kinds of colors ranging from light blue to dark blue, and there were even conches embedded in some places. When the wind blew, they would let out soft humming sounds of different tones. There were also wind chimes made from all kinds of shells that tinkled crisply and added a hint of liveliness to the atmosphere. Due to the unique layout, the entire manor was filled with the smell of the sea. After walking into the manor, Sillin discovered that there were guests visiting the manor since a long time ago. Two children, a boy and a girl, who looked to be around 8 or 9 years old, skipped over and said, "Tobo, you're finally here. We've been waiting for you for a few days." It looked like these two children were old acquaintances of Tobo, and Tobo's face that had been sullen all this time finally smiled. "Why are you guys here?" Tobo ran over to the two children and huddled together. When Sillin passed by the two children, an indecipherable look flashed across his eyes. Before he entered the house, he looked at Castella who was walking in front of him, and Castella just so happened to turn his head to look at him. After making eye contact with Sillin, Castella lowered his eyelids, turned around and continued walking forward. So that's how it is. Now Sillin finally understood why the Feniers family, who had never hired a hunter as their personal bodyguard, would hire Tang Kakikiu as Tobo's personal bodyguard. However, right now, Sillin's confidence in Tang Kakikiu had grown a little more. After all, it was much easier to get used to a game she had already played. Chapter 139. The manor was located next to the sea, and one could see the sea view when they opened the windows. However, for those who came to Sector H, they preferred to be close to the sea and not watch from afar. The people who had arrived before Sillin and the others were the Feniers family's partners in Sector H, the Binger family. Although the Binger family's influence in the entire jail could not be compared to the Feniers family, their influence in Sector H could not be underestimated. The Binger family originated from Sector H, and long before the Feniers family had expanded their influence in Sector H, the Binger family was already a big shot in Sector H. The two families had worked together for hundreds of years, and their relationship could be said to be close. It was worth mentioning that Kirk's wife was from the Binger family. The two children were the children of Kirk's wife's brother. In other words, they were Kirk's nephew and niece. Moreover, the two children were about the same age as Tobo, and they often played together, so their relationship was much better. The boy was called Binger Rost, and he was a year younger than Tobo. The girl was called Binger Emma, and she was the same age as Rost. They were twin siblings, and the whose little princess Kirk mentioned earlier was none other than Binger Emma. Right now, the three children were playing at the beach and building a sandcastle. Emma had even picked up a lot of beautiful little seashells to decorate it. Due to the manor, the coastal areas around it had been heavily guarded. Moreover, there were bodyguards following and protecting them on the beach, so there was usually no danger. The bodyguards on the beach opened up a sunshade pavilion for them, but the three little fellows did not appreciate the gesture. They put away the sunshade pavilion and threw it far away. If they were tired or thirsty, they could just call out, and their bodyguards would immediately bring them towels and juice. Not far away from the three little fellows, Tang Kikikyu opened up a sunshade pavilion and placed a deck chair on it. Then, she pulled out the sunshade pavilion's tray and placed a glass of iced fruit juice on it. She played games and drank juice at the same time, enjoying the peace and quiet. Emma and Rost glanced at Tang Kikikyu a couple of times and asked Tobo who that was. Tobo was too lazy to say much, and simply said that it was his bodyguard and that there was no need to pay attention to him. After hearing Tobo's evaluation, Emma and Rost felt disdain and disgust towards Tang Kikikyu. With their status, there were many people trying to please them every day. Their mother once said that those who tried to curry favor with them only cared about their family's wealth. They didn't really treat them well, so they naturally classified Tang Kikikyu as one of them. After all, with Tang Kikikyu's age, she didn't look like a regular bodyguard. She was more like a freeloader. As for Tang Kikikyu, as long as her eyes were not filled with killing intent, she could just ignore them. Not far away, Silin set up a sunshade pavilion and lay on a chair to read an e-book. Hui Mao had gone to the sea to look for food. There was nothing good in the coastal waters, so it had gone to the depths of the sea. Silin was not worried about it. He believed in the ability of that foodie. Vice Captain Silin. A voice rang out from the side. Silin turned his head to look. It was the person in charge of Tobo's security. His name was Steele, and he should be under Costella's command. Although Steele was the main person in charge of Tobo's security, he wasn't a serious person. He wasn't like the other bodyguards who always had a stiff face. Hearing Steele's words, Silin said, "What's the matter, Mr. Steele?" Steele spread out a chair and sat next to Silin. "Why don't you take on this security job? With your status as the vice captain of Vanguard Division 6, the pay is very high." "I'm not interested. I might as well watch over my own children and play with them." Steele glanced at Tang Qiuqiu, who was playing a game, and smiled. Tang Qiuqiu is indeed the most special child of her age that I've ever seen. Steele had witnessed Tang Qiuqiu's marksmanship before, and Costella had also said that not everyone could possess that kind of gun sense. Even some experienced assassins might not necessarily be able to achieve that level of accuracy. Moreover, Costella had also told him that even though Tang Qiuqiu was only 10 years old, the number of people who had fallen at the muzzle of her gun was definitely not small. She was also a child around the age of 10. Looking at Tang Qiuqiu and then looking at the three brats who were piling up sand, the difference was really fucking huge. Silin did not comment on Steele's words. He glanced at Emma and Rost, who were decorating the sandcastle, and said, "I'm afraid your security job this time will be very difficult." A sharp glint flashed across Steele's eyes. "Vice Captain Silin, what did you guess?" "Guess? Do you guys always guess when you're doing security?" Silin put away his e-book and rested his head on his arm. He squinted at the sea in the distance. It was indeed blue. "What do you mean?" Steele's gaze bore into Sillin as if he wanted to confirm if this young vice captain had really noticed something. You want to know? Name a price. Steele's face twitched. Name a price? As expected of a hunter, seizing every opportunity to make a fortune. Seeing that Steele was silent, Sillin did not say anything either. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the sea breeze, looking so comfortable that he was about to fall asleep. Finally, Steele could not hold it in any longer. Did you notice something unusual? Your security job is pretty good, and you've chosen the right targets to monitor. However, I believe that you still haven't noticed something important, replied Sillin lazily with his eyes still closed. When Costello had lowered his eyelids back then, it was obvious that the other party would most likely use Emma and Ross to carry out the operation. However, Sillin was certain that Costello would never have thought of the other party's method. Steele and Sillin pondered. They had been keeping a close eye on the Binger family members who had come over this time. According to Costello's orders, Emma and Ross were the main focus. After all, Tobo was staying with them. Therefore, Steele had also been secretly monitoring the Binger family's bodyguards who were following Emma and Ross. If any of them made any strange movements, he would kill Wuxia. However, there had been no movements from the security team until now. Although Steele did not doubt Costello's judgment, they had indeed not received any strange movements from either party. Now that he heard Sillin say this, Steele's heart could no longer remain calm. After thinking for 2 seconds, he said, "The price is directly proportional to the importance of the content that Vice Captain Sillin has mentioned." Sillin opened his eyes and raised a finger. 10 million galactic credits. Steele. Could he beat up this guy in front of him? It doesn't matter. Take your time to think about it, but I won't wait until the deadline. Seeing that Sillin was about to fall asleep again, Steele gritted his teeth and said, "Fine." As soon as Steele said, "Fine," Sillin took out a receipt from his pocket. It was obvious that he had prepared it beforehand. "Sign it." Looking at the sparkling numbers, Steele roared in his heart. Hunters and whatnot really deserved a beating. After putting the receipt away, Sillin did not waste any time. He took out the ebook in his hand and flipped through it before passing it to Steele. Steele took it. He was a little confused at first, but after all, he had been by Costello's side for so many years. His mind had expanded quite a bit. The more he looked at Steele, the worse his expression became. "I'll borrow the ebook for a while." He turned around and left after saying that. Sillin waved his hand. "Take it. The rent will be extra. 10,000 per hour." Steele staggered and squeezed out a word through his clenched teeth. "Fine." However, due to the urgency of the situation, Steele had to rush to report to Costello. Therefore, he did not hesitate in accepting Sillin's request. After Steele left, Hui Mao ran over from the other side of the sea. He shook off the water on his body and smacked his lips, looking very satisfied with his meal. "Sillin, there's a situation in the sea." Chapter 140. It was rare for this glutton's first words to not be about food. "Something's up? Tell me." There were no other bodyguards around Sillin's sunshade pavilion, nor were there any monitoring devices. Perhaps they knew that those little tricks were useless against Sillin, so they did not install any monitoring devices around Sillin. At the same time, Sillin knew that this was Costello's way of expressing goodwill. Hui Mao stuffed his head into the cup on the tray beside him and drank some water. After pulling his head out, he shook his head and licked his paws to wipe his face. Then he slowly jumped onto Sillin's shoulder and laid down. "There's an area where the dissolved oxygen in the seawater isn't normal, and it's been decreasing at an increasing rate while I've been foraging for food. There's something in the sea that's absorbing the dissolved oxygen." The decreased dissolved oxygen was not in the lake, but in the sea. It wasn't in the coastal area, but in the distant sea, and it was a large-scale change. There was no way the Fenier's family would not be aware of such a change, but there was still no movement. This meant that someone had tampered with it. The monitoring devices program or data set up in the sea had been tampered with, and the Fenier's family had not noticed this change. Only someone from the Fenier's family would be able to do this. Hui Mao continued, "I've looked at those devices. The temperature, pressure, ion concentration, and so on are all normal. The only abnormality is the dissolved oxygen. If they changed too many items, the chances of being discovered would be higher. As long as they can fool the key items, they'll have achieved their goal. Hui Mao clenched his paws and continued speaking mysteriously to Silin. I went to the depths of the sea and found a few big guys. They're still sleeping, but it looks like they're about to wake up. Big guys. Silin sighed softly. Anything that could be called a big guy by Hui Mao would never disappoint. Somewhere in the manor, inside Kirk's private study, Costella and Kirk were sitting in front of a desk and having a conversation. Next to them was a light screen that displayed the location of the Binger family's visitors. Every single location was monitored in detail, but up until now, the reports from their subordinates had left the duo dissatisfied. It's too quiet. Kirk frowned. Yeah, it doesn't seem like their style. They aren't people who can endure. They shouldn't have waited until now. Costella placed both of his hands on his knees, his fingers moving rhythmically. In other words, they made a move, but we didn't notice it. Kirk did not object to Costella's opinion. That's why I feel uneasy. Why don't we call Tobo back to the manor? If something really happens and we can't react in time, Tobo will be in danger. Originally, he thought that letting Tobo go out to play would cause some commotion, but he didn't expect that there would be no results until now. All right then. As he spoke, Costella's communicator rang. This communicator would only be used by internal personnel in emergency situations. Costella and Kirk's hearts skipped a beat. They exchanged glances. Could there be movement? Connecting the call, the image of Steele appeared. Steele looked very anxious. What is it? Asked Costella. There's an important discovery. Let's talk in the study. After Steele entered the study, he handed the e-book to Costella. This is what Silin showed me. He said that the other party has already made a move. What was shown in Silin's e-book was a type of amphibious parasite. This type of parasite was a type of external fertilization. The female and male parasite would expel mature sex cells from their bodies. When the sperm and egg cells combined outside their bodies, a new life form would form and search for a nearby host. This kind of combination could happen in the air, on the ground, or even in the water. In other words, if Emma and Rost each carried a type of this parasite's sex cells, and these two people had injected some kind of medicine to prevent the parasite from forming a new life form in their bodies, then the one who would suffer the most would be Tobo. Being in close proximity for a long period of time was no doubt a great opportunity. Of course, the parasite on Emma and Rost's bodies would definitely not be the one that Silin showed them. The living environment of this parasite in the e-book was different from the climate and air humidity here. The reason why Silin showed this to Steele was to remind them where they should think about it. Otherwise, it would be too late by the time they realized it. Regarding parasite research, there was a period of peak 50 years ago, but it gradually cooled off after that. Nowadays, the most popular research was still on biochemical exotic beasts, viruses, and related medicines. Therefore, people nowadays wouldn't think about it from this angle. After all, it would be impossible to make good use of a parasite without a certain level of skill. However, Costella and Kirk did not expect the other party to possess such technology. They had miscalculated. While Costella and Kirk were reading the information in the e-book, Steele took out the bill written by Silin and told them about Silin's request. If it's just money, we'll give it to him if he wants it. Costella retracted his gaze from the e-book and said in a low voice. Steele paused for a moment and said in shame, we lost track of the gray cat following Silin after it left the coastal waters. Costella was not too surprised by this. After all, there was no way a pet that stayed by the side of a lieutenant commander would be ordinary. He waved his hands and said, it's not your fault. You go out first and wait outside. All right. Steele bowed and left the study. After Steele left, Costella inhaled deeply and let out a long sigh. Kirk, do you know how the big thorn in Sector V, Poison Fong, was eliminated? Kirk shook his head. I don't know. His main attention was still on Sector H, so he did not know much about the 13 backwater sectors. Therefore, he received the information relatively late. One of Poison Fong's strongholds, 100,000 people, was completely eliminated. The reason was parasites. Kirk could not help but inhale when he heard this. He suddenly felt a little cold. Poison Fong's people were infamous, but they were actually completely eliminated by parasites. The ones who eliminated Poison Fong were Vanguard's people. Since this matter was handled by Vanguard's A Squadron, not many people know the truth. It was common knowledge that information handled by the A Squadrons of the 4 Great Hunter Regiments would be seriously distorted, and the truth would be blurred. This was also the capability of the 4 Great Hunter Regiments. The one who eliminated Poison Fong was Vanguard Division 6, the squad Sillin was in. Kirk understood now. He had thought that Costella's attitude towards Sillin was a little strange. So this was the reason. I know what to do now, Kirk said. Costella nodded. I have a feeling that the parasites are about to reach the peak of their era after 50 years. Just as Kirk was about to give his subordinates an order, Costella's communicator rang. Looking at the display, Costella made a gesture to Kirk, and Kirk immediately put down the work in his hands. Costella had given Sillin his communicator number on this planet. If there was nothing important or if the situation was not urgent, Sillin would not call Costella's number directly. Just like how he had sent the news through Steel just now, although the parasite would affect Tobo, it was not life-threatening for the time being. But now, since Sillin had called Costella's number directly, it meant that the situation was serious. Costella had no choice but to treat it with caution. The communication was connected, and Sillin's image popped up. I have a message. But Sillin did not continue to say what it was specifically. Named the price. This time, Costella did not need Sillin to mention it. Chapter 141. This little old man was straightforward. Seeing how straightforward Costella was, Sillin cut to the chase as well. 20 million galactic credits. Sure. Bill or savings card? Costella said this almost without hesitation. There's no rush. I'll give you the bill. I believe that the Fenier's family won't go back on their word when it comes to this. I'll tell you the information first. Sillin straightened his expression. There's a region in the ocean with abnormal dissolved oxygen. That was all Sillin said, but he had already conveyed what he wanted to convey. He believed that with Costella and Kirk's intellect, they would be able to foresee and infer what might happen and certain threats. Since Sillin said that there was a region with abnormal dissolved oxygen in the ocean, and the Fenier's family's monitoring device in the ocean did not detect this information, it meant that someone had made a move long ago. Moreover, Costella and Kirk were well aware of the disaster that could be caused by a large-scale abnormal dissolved oxygen in the ocean. Therefore, after hearing Sillin's words, Kirk and Costella immediately got to work. The 3 little fellows who were happily catching crabs on the beach were escorted back to the manor by the surrounding bodyguards. Before they left the beach, Sillin stopped Tang Qiuqiu and told her a few things. He also reminded Tang Qiuqiu to be careful. After that, Sillin and Hui Mao returned to the manor, where Costella had arranged a guest room for Sillin. Sillin passed the bill to Steele and asked him to pass it to Costella. This time, Steele did not look surprised. Instead, his attitude towards Sillin was a little more cautious than before, and his words were not as casual as before. After entering the room, Sillin placed his finger on Hui Mao's forehead. Hui Mao then transmitted all the information he had gathered in the ocean to Sillin. It was very strange. Sillin was clearly not a cyborg, but he could receive the information formed from the special signals sent by the cyborg Hui Mao. Feeling the information transmitted from his finger, Sillin also analyzed the situation here at the same time. He also saw the big guys in the deep sea that Hui Mao mentioned. If those big guys rushed to the coast at the same time, even if they had weapons, they would probably cause serious damage. What's more, there was an underwater base near the coast. If they were hit by those guys, the underwater base would be destroyed. However, Sillin was curious as to how those people could ensure that the big guys at the bottom of the sea would wake up and make them come over at the same time. While Sillin was analyzing the problem, Kirk welcomed a guest from the Binger family. Binger Warsaw, Emma and Rost's half-sister. Although she was a young lady, She played an important role in the Binger family's business. She also had the power to make decisions on some big issues. This also showed that this young lady wasn't simple. She had long hair that resembled the ocean, a dignified Rayleigh temperament, and a light blue dress that hung to the ground. However, as she walked, it outlined the silhouette of her long legs that were covered by the dress. She walked calmly towards Kirk and Costella. Unlike Emma and Rost, Warsaw's mother was a native of Sector H's ancient race, the New Europeans. Some people said that the New Europeans were the descendants of the mermaids. They possessed the appearance of humans and could walk and run on land. They could also transform into mermaids and swim in the sea. And Warsaw was undoubtedly more outstanding than her predecessors. The New Europeans didn't like to show their legs. This was because most people's first reaction when they saw the New Europeans was to look at their legs. This was because the New Europeans would transform their long legs into tails when they transformed. The New Europeans didn't like other people's gazes. Therefore, it had become a habit over time. They would wear long skirts or robes that covered the lower half of their bodies tightly. As for Binger Warsaw, the people of Sector H called her the Binger family's mermaid princess. This not only showed Warsaw's outstanding appearance and temperament, but also her background. What a surprise! I didn't expect the beautiful mermaid princess to come. Kirk gave a gentlemanly bow. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Kirk. My father is ill and unable to come, but this matter is of great importance to him. That's why he sent me over. Warsaw also gave a lady's bow and responded appropriately. It looked like she encountered such things often. I'm very sorry that Emma and Rost have caused you trouble. Warsaw was referring to the fact that some people had used Emma and Rost to harm Tobo. Although the Binger family and the Feniers family would negotiate some matters here, no one from the Binger family had told Emma and Rost that Tobo was coming. In other words, some people had purposely leaked this information to Emma and Rost. With Emma and Rost's temperament, they would definitely cry and beg to come over if they heard that Tobo was coming to planet Zafia. Don't mind them. Even if they didn't use this method, they would have used other methods. Without the Feniers family's permission, Emma and Rost would not have come over either. From a certain perspective, the Feniers family and the Binger family had reached an agreement on this matter. After the small talk, Kirk told Warsaw about the matters here. Other than the parasite reproductive cells that Emma and Rost carried, he also told Warsaw about the matters in the sea. After all, Warsaw, who had inherited the bloodline of a European, would definitely know more about the problems of the sea. After Warsaw finished listening to Kirk's narration, the meaning in her ocean blue eyes was unclear. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly said, "Is it convenient for me to explore the sea?" "Go ahead." Kirk did not have any objections to Warsaw's request. He only hoped that Warsaw could discover more things and understand more. Only then would they be able to act more purposefully. Warsaw did not have time to meet Emma and Rost. Under the guidance of Kirk's men, she brought the Binger family members to an area of the sea on a space plane. Kirk had already dealt with the monitoring device in the sea and the related personnel. The fact that they had tampered with the monitoring device 7 days ago meant that these people had been deployed for a long time. Kirk was prepared to clean up every single person in the Feniers family's territory in Sector H after this incident to prevent any future troubles. Warsaw changed into a new set of clothes and jumped into the sea with a few European newbies. After entering the sea, their arms and legs would change into webbing, tails, and fins. This greatly increased their swimming speed in the sea. At the same time, they could use their skin to absorb some of the dissolved oxygen in the sea. Before long, Warsaw returned to the spaceplane with her men and expressed that she wanted to check out the coastal waters. Although Kirk did not understand Warsaw's actions, he still agreed to it. Some people were not optimistic about this. Although Warsaw and the others were European newbies, the Feniers family's defense system was also densely spread around the coastal waters. How could there possibly be any abnormalities? When the spaceplane arrived at the coastal waters, Warsaw jumped into the sea with her men just like before. Not long after, Warsaw returned with a pale face and told Kirk that they were in big trouble. Chapter 142. What's going on? On the other side of the communicator, Kirk looked a little nervous. Anything that could be classified as big trouble by Warsaw was definitely difficult to deal with. Mr. Kirk, I've discovered some echo conches in the coastal area. Please send your men to evacuate them. The situation is urgent. Please act immediately. Warsaw's voice was trembling slightly, and this made Kirk even more worried. What kind of echo conch could cause this famous mermaid princess to react like this? Although there were many things he did not understand, Kirk still followed Warsaw's instructions and immediately sent his men over with the best equipment. Kirk even personally supervised the operation. When Kirk saw the image sent over by the underwater personnel, he was shocked. The diving personnel pushed aside the seaweed and revealed 6 conches that were about 10 meters long. Other than their size, they did not look much different from other conches. However, it was these 6 conches that caused Warsaw to tremble in fear. These echo conches must not be damaged in the slightest. If they are broken, it is highly likely that they will emit sound uncontrollably. If they emit sound, then everything will be too late. Warsaw said. Kirk sent out one order after another into the communicator. At the same time, the Fenier's family had already put the coastal area under martial law. If there were any unusual movements or suspicious people, they would kill Wusha. What is an echo conch? Kirk finally asked. Warsaw forced a smile upon hearing this. I was careless. Even the natives of Sector H rarely know about echo conches, much less those who are not from Sector H. It is normal that you do not know about them. After adjusting her breathing, Warsaw continued, you know that fishes and many other marine creatures do not have ears in the true sense of the word. They receive and feel sounds through their skin. Some sounds will gather some special sound waves. We cannot hear these sound waves, but they will cause pain when they act on our eardrums. Warsaw pointed at her head. That is why many humans will feel a headache when they hear certain sounds. Or perhaps, the sound waves that are beyond the range of human hearing are completely inaudible to humans. However, these sounds have a huge impact on the creatures living in the sea. I wonder if you have heard of sea god summon? Warsaw asked. I remember Tobo reading a fairy tale that involved the call of the sea god. In the story, the sea god would summon the monsters that lived deep under the sea to punish the sinners. When Tobo was young, Kirk used to read him fairy tales. He had seen such a story, but Kirk had never taken it to heart. After all, it was just a fairy tale. It sounds like a fairy tale, but the call of the sea god is real. It happens in the deep sea, in the abyssal crevice. When there was a change in the seabed's crust, due to some physical or chemical reasons, there would be some sounds coming from the cracks. Even the most advanced instruments could not simulate it. Humans will get headaches if they hear these sounds, and in severe cases, they will die directly. However, for sea creatures, especially the giant deep-sea sea beasts, these sounds will stimulate their skin, making them excited, and they will chase after the sounds. Hearing Warsaw's explanation, Kirk felt goosebumps all over his body. The communicator in Kirk's hand was on, and Costello was listening quietly on the other end of the communicator. He could not help but sigh at the unknown mysteries of Sector H. Echo conches live at the bottom of the sea, and they usually live around those cracks. Every time a crack makes a sound, the echo conch will remember the sound. Every few years, they will emit the sound they remembered and attract the deep-sea creatures. These creatures will then bring the echo conches to other places and reproduce. For young echo conches, the water environment in the crack zone is not suitable for them. When the crack makes a sound again, the echo conch will stick to the deep-sea creatures and return to the crack's surroundings, absorbing the certain factors released from the crack for the echo conch's growth. Therefore, for adult echo conches, the area around the crack is a place they must survive. If they leave this place, they will not live for more than 20 years. Before the echo conch dies, they will emit one last sound, and it is also the loudest sound they have ever made in their lives. According to the condition of this planet's ocean, there are no deep sea cracks like that, so it is impossible for echo conches to exist. Right now, the echo conches under this sea area should be brought over by the Vezin family. Because the condition of this planet's ocean is not suitable for reproduction, and there are no cracks that emit sound to summon sea creatures. These echo conches have always been in a state of hibernation. However, this state of hibernation is about to reach its limit. If they were placed in the deep sea, they could still persist for 3 to 5 years, but placing them near the sea has undoubtedly accelerated their death. There is a possibility that they will emit their final sound at any moment. Kirk could not help but recall. The cooperation between the Feniers family and the Wiesen family had been cut off 5 years ago, and the closest period of cooperation was 10 years ago. These echo conches should have been secretly placed into the sea 10 years ago as well. This meant that the Wiesen family had been plotting against the Feniers family since 10 years ago. They had set up a hidden bomb on this planet that the Feniers family used as Sector H's administrative center, and the joint suppression of the Feniers family and the Binger family over the past 2 years had caused the Wiesen family to decide to activate this sleeping bomb. Kirk checked for a bit, and according to the records of the Coastal Seas Defense System, there were no threatening incidents here a month ago. However, if there was anything unusual, then it would be those dolphins that had appeared at that time. On this planet, it was not rare for dolphins to appear in groups near the sea. This was especially true in the past few years, as similar situations had appeared in every part of the planet's coastal sea. From the looks of it, those dolphins had been trained to transport these echo conches here. Since there were only dolphins and conches, the defense system did not classify them as a threat. After all, they had never encountered such an incident before. Moreover, Kirk had never objected to the activity of dolphins and other sea creatures near the sea in the past, but now, perhaps the Wiesen family was the one who planned the dolphin swarm incident in the first place. I remember that there are people in the Wiesen family who are skilled in taming, and the Wiesen family's experienced tamer has always kept a low profile and is unknown to the public. Kirk and Costello also agreed with Warsaw's opinion. As long as these echo conches have not reached their final deadline, as long as they have not made any noise, this matter will be easy to handle. After we get them out, we can throw them far away into the depths of the sea and blow them up. No matter how they scream, they will not have any impact on the coastal areas. Kirk sighed. I hope so. At the same time, he transferred a group of people over to strengthen the defense, to prevent external interference. Inside the manor, Hui Mao squatted on the windowsill, looking in the direction of the sea. Silin sat on a chair next to the window, reading a book. Hui Mao's cattail was draped over his arm. Hui Mao could see what was happening in the distant coastal sea. Although he could not see the situation at the bottom of the sea, Hui Mao could monitor the communication device in the aircraft parked above the sea. Through monitoring these conversations, he could roughly understand what was happening. Hui Mao listened to every word of the conversation through the communication device. Then, Hui Mao transmitted this information to Silin through his tail on Silin's arm. From an outsider's perspective, there was nothing unusual about this man and cat. There are fish coming. And there are quite a lot of them, Hui Mao suddenly said. Chapter 143. When Hui Mao said this, inside the spaceplane above the coastal waters, Warsaw's expression also changed. She said to Kirk, "A large school of fish is coming our way, and they're surrounding us from 3 directions. There are no less than 300 of them." The defense system in the sea had obviously detected this as well, but since there had never been a school of fish attack, the program settings did not display the danger level as high. Kirk thought that after this incident, he would definitely reset the threat level of the school of fish attack in the defense system. That was then and this was now. Right now, the echo conches were being transported under the sea with utmost caution, and yet a large school of fish just had to appear at this time. He could not help but think deeply. Why did such a situation occur? Excluding natural circumstances and other triggers, the only thing left was the human factor. Kirk had mobilized his men to defend the area, and the spaceplane had also readied its weapons. Black marlin. The back of their bodies was almost black in color, and they had dorsal fins that were as wide as sails. They were all more than 10 meters long, and they were much faster than a normal marlin. When they swam with all their might, Their speed was no slower than a bullet, and the bone swords formed from their premandibles and nasal bones were even sturdier and could easily pierce through steel plates. Black marlin usually lived far out in the sea, and no one had ever seen them near the coastal waters. But right now, these big marlin were split into 3 well-trained groups and outflanking them. Moreover, it was obvious that they were experienced in dodging bullets and their reflexes, as if they had practiced this thousands of times. In other words, these black marlin had been trained before. There's another school of fish coming from behind them, and these black marlin are just the vanguard. Mr. Kirk, I think it's that mysterious tamer from the Wiesen family. Warsaw said. Warsaw had also heard from the elders in her family that there weren't many true tamers left in Sector H. Following the spread of new technology and other advanced civilizations, the ancient inheritance of communicating with fish had gradually declined. Right now, some of the so-called famous tamers were just jugglers for people's entertainment. A true tamer only needed one person to control hundreds or thousands of marine fishes or other advanced marine creatures for their use. However, in this current developed sector, ancient tamers were no longer known to the public. Warsaw knew of 2 such tamers. One was in the Binger family, and he usually kept an extremely low profile. Not many people in the Binger family knew of his existence. The other was the Wiesen family's tamer, and he was similarly low profile and unknown to the public. However, when the Wiesen family was being suppressed by both the Feniers family and the Binger family at the same time, this tamer finally made his appearance. Other than this, Warsaw's elders had said that there were actually a lot of ancient tamers in Sector H, but no one knew where they were. They could live in seclusion, or they could enter the world and become ordinary people. Maybe they had brushed past you before, maybe they were the human service staff of a certain restaurant, or maybe they were a certain high official in the administration of Sector H. No one knew. Although Warsaw, as a European newbie, could communicate with some advanced fish, her abilities were far inferior to a tamer's. This was the first time Warsaw had seen a tamer in action since she was born. It was the result of perfect training. These 300 or so black marlin dodged the attacks on the surface and underwater, causing trouble for the people on this side. As they were transporting the Echo Conch, some of their weapons were restricted, and their movements were restricted. In addition to the speed and dodging abilities of these black marlins, the blocking effect was not very good under the surface of the sea. Kirk felt very passive. Moreover, there were waves of attacks coming from behind these 300 or so fish. Where are the people in the underwater base? Why is there still no response? Kirk roared angrily at the people beside him. He had contacted the underwater base earlier and asked them to cooperate with the attack, but he didn't expect that there would be no response at all even after a few minutes had passed. Boss, the underwater base is under attack. We can't send reinforcements in time. The subordinate beside Kirk pulled up a communication image and passed it to Kirk. There were no less than 3 underwater bases around here, but not a single one had come. They were all being attacked by shoals of fish right now. These were all fish that should have been far out in the sea, and many of them were highly aggressive. It was indeed difficult for them to free up their hands in a short period of time. Kirk did not want to mobilize the people in the manor anymore. He was afraid that the Wiesen family would create a diversion. Just as they were busy, an explosion occurred in one part of the manor. Although it was not close to Tobo and the others' living quarters, the 3 little fellows were still shocked by the explosion. After the 3 of them were brought back to the manor, they received Costella's so-called antivirus. Although they did not know what was going on with the medicine and light that was sprayed on their bodies, this was a mandatory request from Costella and Kirk. Even Tobo could not resist. The 3 little fellows, who were exhausted by the antivirus, were about to fall asleep when a big explosion woke them up. The bodyguard came in and told them that it was just a small accident and that they did not need to worry. There were bodyguards standing guard outside the room. On the other hand, Tang Qiuqiu was even more excited. She stopped playing her game and raised all her vigilance to pay attention to her surroundings. Sillin had told her that those people's target was Tobo. They would definitely find a way to bypass the bodyguards and attack Tobo. Therefore, once the chaos began, Tang Qiuqiu had to pay attention to her surroundings. Even in this room that was protected by multiple layers of bodyguards and defense systems, Tang Qiuqiu would not let her guard down. Sillin had said that her target might not necessarily be a human. Costella was commanding the guards in the manor. Since the explosion had only occurred outside the manor, it meant that the people who had infiltrated the manor would not be able to get close to the core area of the manor at all. If they could not get close to Tobo, then they could only create chaos at the periphery to attract attention and seek an opportunity to infiltrate the core area of the manor. Therefore, Costella did not let down the guards at the core area of the manor. He reminded them to keep their eyes open and pay close attention to everything inside the manor through the defense and surveillance systems. The chaos has begun. In the guest room, Hui Mao, who was squatting on the windowsill, appeared to be very excited. He squinted his eyes and took a deep breath. Wow, the smell of fish. Sillin, when are we going to make our move? Hui Mao was eager to give it a try. Let's wait a little longer. The key person hasn't come out yet, Sillin said as he looked out the window. All right, I think something special is coming. The cat's ears were perked up. If one were to look closely, one would notice that the fur inside the cat's ears were even trembling slightly. It was receiving all sorts of subtle sound waves that ordinary people could not hear. Over at the coastal waters, while fending off wave after wave of attacks from shoals of fish, Kirk finally heard what he wanted to hear. Boss, all the echo conches have been moved into the space plane. An underling reported. Good. Follow the previous plan. Throw them into space and detonate them. Roger that. Kirk watched the space plane take off. It was only when the space plane left the atmosphere that his heart, which had almost jumped out of his throat, finally calmed down. Mr. Kirk. Warsaw's voice sounded urgent. What's wrong? Kirk's heart, which had just calmed down, was in his throat again. I'm afraid those big guys at the bottom of the deep sea are coming. Chapter 144. Those fellows in the deep sea? Can the tamer even control those big fellows? Kirk exclaimed in shock. Although Kirk did not know much about tamers, when he thought of those tyrants of the deep sea being controlled by a tamer, he really felt a chill run down his spine. That would be too much of a monster. No, they can't control the tyrants of the deep sea. However, they can control other fishes and change the environment of the sea, prompting those tyrants of the deep sea to move. You're saying that? Vizen's men changed the dissolved oxygen there in order to make it easier for those tyrants of the deep sea to move according to their route? Kirk recalled the area of the sea with extremely low dissolved oxygen. Kirk could not find the tamer who was controlling these shoals of fish. Until now, there was no news of the tamer at all. Although the tamer could not control those big fellows, they could awaken those fellows sleeping in the deep sea. Right now, the shoals of fish were still swarming in this direction. The awakened tyrants of the deep sea needed to forage for food, and they discovered that the surrounding waters were lacking in food and the dissolved oxygen was extremely low. Such an environment would force them to move to waters with a better environment and more food. The tamer had created a misconception and made them think that rich food and a good water environment would be in this direction. Warsaw ordered her subordinates to drive a space plane from the Binger family over. Mr. Kirk, I can hold those big fellows back for a while. Use this time to think of a way to find that tamer. If push comes to shove, we'll have no choice but to use weapons of mass destruction. After all, this planet was very important to the Fenrir's family. However, if those high-energy weapons were to be used frequently, it would have an extremely serious impact on the environment and the marine ecosystem here. The destruction of the overall system would cause this sapphire to lose its luster. After all, the ocean was not a fish pond. This was something Kirk did not wish to see. Therefore, he could only follow Warsaw's plan for now. Kirk and Costella had never imagined that a tamer would be so capable. No wonder those old men of the Fenrir's family said that every sector had its own primordial power. It would be best if they could not come into contact with these primordial powers. After Warsaw entered her family's spaceplane, the spaceplane flew into the distance. After leaving the coastal waters, a round platform popped out from the front of the spaceplane. Warsaw stood on top of it. Under the surface of the sea, in the depths, a few huge creatures were moving towards the shore. In the distance, one after another, huge black shadows were coming over. Gazing at the endless sea, Warsaw let out a high-pitched chant from her throat. No one could understand what she was singing, but Kirk realized that the shoals of fish on this side of the sea had obviously calmed down, and the anti-interference scanner showed that the movement speed of those dots in the distant deep sea had also slowed down. Before the echo conch was brought out, Hua Sha did not dare to chant, as she was afraid that it would have the opposite effect. If the echo conch came into contact with the sound wave and performed an ensemble, then it would be over. Now that the issue of the echo conch had been resolved, Warsaw could finally relax. At the same time, she also took the opportunity to make the Fenier's family wary of her and increase her own influence. She also made Kirk think highly of the Binger family, which would bring the Binger family even greater benefits in the future. The mysterious language, the high-frequency chanting, was like a song from the deep sea, deep and distant, filled with an ancient aura. This was the song sung by the bloodline of the ancient race of Sector H, the Ocean race. It could communicate with the higher-level creatures in the sea. The higher the evolutionary level of the creatures that lived in the sea, the smoother this kind of communication would be. Therefore, the shoals of fish attacking the coastal waters had only calmed down, but for those big fellows coming from the deep sea, they could understand the meaning behind the sound better. Kirk looked at the display screen of the instrument in his hand. The detectors set up around Warsaw's sea area could not transmit any data back. The sound wave interfered with the electromagnetic field in that area, disrupting the transmission of energy and signals. No wonder Warsaw insisted on using the Binger family's special spaceplane. It was made especially for Warsaw, and it could resist such sound waves. If it was any other spaceplane, it would have lost control and crashed a long time ago. Kirk now felt that he needed to re-evaluate the Binger family. Although there weren't many newcomers in the Binger family right now, and there was only one mermaid princess, it was still a family that originated from this sector after all. It was hard for Kirk to assess just how much hidden strength they still had. Take Warsaw, for example. In terms of individual strength, she was only equivalent to a normal rank A genotype character. But if the abilities brought about by her bloodline were included, Kirk was willing to bet that if his trained bodyguards were to encounter such sound waves, they would definitely grab their heads and roll to the ground. No wonder Warsaw's status in the Binger family was so high. Other than her ability to handle affairs, her personal strength was also a significant factor. The other coastal areas of the continental plate and the underwater bases were attacked by shoals of fish. Therefore, Kirk had to think twice even if he wanted to transfer manpower over. This was the place with the highest number of guards. If he were to transfer manpower from the other places, something might go wrong. The people at the spaceport outside the planet could not be moved either. It was the planet's most important line of defense, so Kirk had not mobilized any more manpower. Is there still no news? Kirk asked his subordinate next to him with an ugly expression. Kirk felt that the tamer should be hiding in the vicinity, so he sent his subordinates to search for the tamer. But until now, they hadn't found a damn thing. This made him very dissatisfied, and at the same time, he felt a sense of wariness towards the ancient power of the sector that his elders spoke of. Warsaw's abilities were displayed on the surface, but the tamer was hidden in the shadows. The latter was more difficult to deal with. I'm sorry, boss, there's still no news. The subordinate next to Kirk bowed his head and said, "Increase the intensity." They were in a hurry right now. Warsaw had said that she didn't know how long they could drag things out. Maybe they could drag things out for a few days, or maybe they would collapse in the next moment. She couldn't say for sure either. Yes. Sillin looked out the window at the other side of the sea. Although they were so far away, he could still hear the mermaid princess chanting. However, now was not the time to be amazed by this mermaid princess abilities. There were definitely not many people who could infiltrate the Fenier's family's territory, and Castella had already cleaned up a group of people based on some clues. In that case, the number of people left behind would be even fewer. What Sillin was waiting for was the most special person or people among the people left behind. A trainer who could control fish from the distant sea. Inside the manor, in the room where Tobo and the others were. After that explosion, the the three little fellows had lost all desire to sleep. The bodyguards forbade them from going out, so they hung around the room out of boredom. They really had nothing to do, so Tobo and Rost started playing chess while Emma watched from the side. Just as the two little boys were grinding their teeth and Emma was cheering them on, 3 crisp popping sounds attracted the trio's attention. 3 perforated crabs lay on the ground not far away from them. They were the 3 crabs that they had caught from the beach purely for fun. Tang Kakikyu was holding a noiseless gun in her hand. She no longer looked at the crabs, but her eyes were sparkling. In another room of the manor, Costella received a report that some of the fresh seafood that was prepared for food from the kitchen and seafood storage had disappeared. Chapter 145. When Costella heard his subordinate's report, he sighed. They had been careless. Since the enemy had sent out a tamer, then it didn't matter if they were living in the sea or were treated as ornamental fish or fresh ingredients, all of them could be controlled by the tamer. At the same time, this also told Costella that the tamer was already very close to the manor. Otherwise, those sea creatures that were treated as ingredients and ornamental fish would not have such mobility. After all, they had avoided the eyes and ears of some people inside the manor, and this was not something they could do with their normal intellect. While Costella was issuing orders one after another, inside Tobo and the others' room, the 3 little fellows were glaring angrily at Tang Chiochio as they stared at the pierced crabs lying motionless on the ground. Although they did not know how the crabs had come out of the box in the first place, they were already dissatisfied with Tang Chiochio, and now they were even more furious. Tang Chiochio, what is the meaning of this? Emma was the first to jump out and point at Tang Chiochio and roared, "We went through a lot of trouble to catch them, and you dare shoot them. This is unforgivable." Tang Chiochio completely ignored her. Because Sillin had told her that the ones who attacked Tobo did not necessarily have to be human, Tang Chiochio relied completely on her instincts to kill everything that posed a threat to Tobo. In that instant just now, Tang Chiochio suddenly felt an anomaly, and then she saw the crabs that were not moving as usual. It was still the same 3 crabs. Tang Chiochio had watched Tobo and the others catch the crabs. At the time, the 3 crabs gave her a rather dull feeling, and they were just things that could be used as food. However, in that instant she suddenly felt a murderous intent. It was a very obscure murderous intent that the bodyguards outside could not sense at all. It was also thanks to the fact that Tang Chiochio had been brought out of the chaotic lands of Sector V and was able to capture that obscure murderous intent. Otherwise, she would have died 1,000 times over in Sector V. Luo Shi was definitely biased towards his own people, condemning Tang Kakikyu's evil deeds together with Emma, but Tobo only frowned, his gaze sweeping back and forth between Crab and Tang Chiochio. There must be a surveillance camera in the room. After Tang Kakikyu opened fire, the people watching were afraid that these little brats would throw a tantrum and cause trouble. Moreover, the kid named Tang Chiochio was carrying a gun. The bodyguards outside the door opened and came in, especially the bodyguards from the Binger family. Because they were not familiar with Tang Chiochio, they all stood around Emma and Rost. However, after Phineas and the 2 bodyguards from the Binger family glanced at each other, they ignored Emma and Rost's complaints and gestured to their subordinates to check the situation in the room. Just now, Costella had informed them to pay close attention to all marine creatures, be it prawns, crabs, fish, or sea snakes. It was very likely that they had already been controlled. Looking at the 3 crabs that Tang Chiochio had shot through, the 2 bodyguards could not help but sigh. It was fortunate that this little girl had noticed it, or there really was no telling what would have happened. At the same time, the Binger family's bodyguard was still guessing who on earth Tang Chiochio was, or was this just a blind cat running into a dead mouse? The bodyguards discovered a few more prawns and wriggling marine mollusks in a couple of hidden air vents. By now, even Emma and Rost had realized that something was wrong. After all, they still had a bit of a sense of crisis, and they were able to connect the dots a little. Therefore, they did not make a fuss right now, and quietly watched the bodyguards inspect everything inside the room. While the bodyguards were inspecting the room and observing Tang Chiochio at the same time, Tang Chiochio completely ignored them. When she felt that there was no threat, She sat down on a chair and started playing her game. She did not even look Tobo in the eye, angering him so much that he nearly flipped out again. Hui Mao could see what the surveillance cameras could see as well. Therefore, both Hui Mao and Silin were aware of all this. Qiuqiu is indeed an excellent hunter. At least, she's better than that bunch of bodyguards, said Hui Mao. She should be fine on her side, right? Probably. The bodyguards from the Feniers and Binger families aren't just for show. As long as they pay attention to the right direction, those marine creatures won't be able to get close to them. Silin looked at the sea outside the window. To be able to control these marine creatures with low intelligence inside the manor, I believe that the mastermind is about to come out soon. Although Warsaw had stalled those deep-sea giants, the shoal's attacks in the coastal areas were growing fiercer and fiercer. A layer of fish corpses floated on the surface of the sea, and fish bones were also deposited at the bottom of the sea. The overly dense mass of fish corpses was greatly disruptive to the Feniers family's movements, and some of the underwater bullets with low penetrative power were basically useless against them. However, they dared not use the more powerful torpedoes. It would be bad if they affected Warsaw, and if that happened, then they wouldn't just be facing these shoals, but the deep-sea overlords as well. Kirk was very anxious right now, and he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He clearly knew that the tamer was around, yet he could not find that cunning bastard. It was not a good idea to continue like this. He knew that the situation at the manor was probably very passive as well, and right now he only regretted underestimating the Wiesen family's capabilities. If he thought about the worst-case scenario, Tobo might not be the only one who would be threatened this time. Even the entire Feniers family's arrangements on this planet would be severely affected. After all, the livable planets in Sector H were mainly dominated by the ocean. What a headache! While Warsaw was cautiously delaying the deep-sea overlords, Kirk was racking his brains for a solution, and Costella was commanding the people of the manor to strengthen the surveillance. Flat figures were approaching the coast under the cover of shoals of fish from the bottom of the sea near the shore. Therefore, while the space planes in the air and the submarines were fighting closely against the shoals, the alarm system next to Kirk's hands suddenly rang. This was the first time it had sounded so fiercely since he reconfigured the surveillance program. What the hell is going on? Kirk looked at the display, and what he saw stunned him. Kirk, who had held an important position in the Feniers family for many years, had never thought he would see such a scene. What was the difference between a bird and a fish? One was in the sky and the other was in the water. This was what most people, including Kirk, thought. What Kirk saw now, however, completely overturned his previous opinion. Fish that lived in the water might not necessarily be incapable of flight. It would be a lie to say that he was not shocked as he looked at the flat figures rushing out of the sea. Kirk did not know what kind of fish they were. Excluding their tails, they were all more than 5 meters long, and some were even more than 10 meters long. They looked a little like manta rays, but they were flatter and lighter than manta rays. Their specialized pectoral fins were elongated like wings, allowing them to fly at low altitudes out of the sea. It was one thing if there was only one of these things, but now there were hundreds and thousands of them, and they were even showing signs of increasing. They crashed into the space planes in the air as if they were unafraid of death, and seriously interfered with the space plane's ability to block the shoals in the sea. At the same time, because there were too many of them, some of them took the opportunity to charge towards the coast. Chapter 146. Stop them. Kirk knew that these fellows' target was the manor. It would be troublesome if they were allowed to approach the manor. The situation at the manor was unclear to begin with, and adding these flying fishes to the mix would make things even worse. The shoals of fish in the sea could not come ashore, so they would not pose much of a threat to the manor no matter what they did. That was why Kirk was prepared to mobilize the defense team in the sea and shift their target. Who knew that Kirk would still underestimate the threat of these sea creatures? Boss, the sea snakes. Kirk was about to give an order to the underwater team when he was stopped by his subordinate's voice beside him. He looked at the display. Some of the sea snakes dodged the shots with their agility and slender bodies and began to come ashore. Kirk's heart turned cold just by looking at the patterns on the sea snakes' bodies. The venom that the sea snakes spat out was very corrosive, and this undoubtedly increased the difficulty of the defense battle. His subordinate also told him that there were some larger sea snakes and other terrestrial sea creatures in the sea. Kirk felt suffocated all over. This kind of restricted battle was so goddamn depressing. Fortunately, he had many years of experience. After Kirk quickly cooled down, he issued one order after another. A group of people retreated to the coast and targeted the sea creatures that came ashore. A group of people attacked the flying fishes in the air. The people protecting Warsaw were not allowed to move. While Kirk and Costello were busy, Sillin patted Huemao's head and said, "Pay attention to those flying fishes. I think that the tamer is on one of them." The people outside the manor did not have the time to catch their breath. If it wasn't for their higher gene rank, they would have died a long time ago. The people inside the manor were even more on guard. They did not expect to face such a great war of mere people. Fortunately, fish were fish. They could not fly as nimbly as birds, and they could not fly too high either. Therefore, it was relatively easy to hit them. The manpower the Fenier's family had mobilized from other parts of Sector H could not arrive immediately. Therefore, they could drag things out for as long as they could, and it would be better when they had sufficient manpower. The protective shield around the manor had been raised when the flying fishes appeared. However, it did not take long before they realized that there was a problem with the shield. The repair crews found some shrimp and crab corpses at the problematic spots. They had obviously died from touching high-energy circuits. It turned out that the main target of the missing seafood that was supposed to be a dish on the dining table was not Tobo, but the shield. Costella, who was watching everything from inside the manor, now truly felt the powerful influence of a trainer. With just his own strength, he could make all the marine creatures on the entire planet go crazy. The entire planet? Suddenly, Costella shuddered. It was impossible that there was only one trainer. If a single tamer could command so many shoals of fish in so many places at the same time, then it would be way too heaven-defying. If the ancient tamer could achieve such an effect on his own, then there was no way he would have fallen from Sector H. The information Costella received stated that the coastal areas were being attacked by shoals of fish. The shoals of fish control covered almost all of the important coastal areas of the entire planet. Otherwise, they would have been able to mobilize manpower. Although Warsaw said that the Wiesen family only had one ancient tamer, but what if they actually had more than one ancient tamer? There should be more than one ancient tamer controlling shoals of fish in so many areas. But why did they only target this place? Although the Fenier's family's young master Tobo, the Fenier's family's Sector HEO Kirk, and the Binger family's people were all at the manor was just a private residence. The other places on land were the real management hub zones that were in charge of Sector H's business. If those zones were destroyed, then the management of Sector H would run into trouble. If they wanted to attack the Fenier's family's businesses in Sector H, then attacking those places would definitely bring them a lot of benefits. However, if there really was more than one ancient tamer, then why did they show mercy at the other places and only delay the reinforcements? What a contradiction! Costella knew that now was not the time to think about this, but once he had started, he could not help but think even more. Costella felt the temperature of the blood in his body grow much colder. Which other family was involved in this? If there really was a fourth family that had interfered, then the situation would not be so optimistic. However, from the looks of it, this fourth family's attitude was a little too ambiguous. Not only did they help the Wiesen family attack the Fenier's family situation here, but they did not go too far, and their stance was not absolute. According to Costella's understanding of the families that had grudges with the Fenier's family, this shouldn't be the case. After Sillin's reminder, Huimao had been paying attention to the flying fish in the air. Slowly, he fixed his eyes on one. "Sillin, it's that one." When Huimao spoke, Sillin had obviously noticed it as well. He looked at the flying fish that was pretending to be hit and falling from the sky, and patted Huimao. "Come, let's go see the legendary tamer." Sillin and Huimao immediately jumped out of the window. The surveillance personnel reported Sillin's situation to Costella, and Castella sent a few people to follow them. He knew that with Silen's abilities as the vice commander of AB Squadron, he must have discovered something, and something crucial at that. The flying fish that had pretended to be shot down landed near the manor's garden with its belly facing up. It was mixed in with the other flying fish that had been shot down, and it did not look very eye-catching. However, not long after it landed, a sticky substance gushed out from the part of its back that was in contact with the ground. The color was very similar to the color of the flying fish's back, and since it was stuck to the flying fish's back, the flying fish could not easily notice the abnormality of this flying fish when it was flying in the air. Under the cover of the many flying fish's corpses, the sticky substance slowly moved towards the manor. Silen did not act immediately. Instead, he pulled back the people Castella had sent to follow behind him. They were not too surprised that Silen had discovered that they were tailing them, and they were not embarrassed either. However, Silen's words had indeed shocked them. Silen pointed in a direction and said, "The tamer is over there, but you guys need to notify Castella first. Many of the flying fish that have fallen to the ground are still able to move. Send someone to finish them off." Many of the flying fish that had fallen to the ground were indeed heavily injured, and they looked like they were covered in blood. However, they were still alive, and if one were to examine them with a life detector, they would discover that a third of the flying fish that had fallen to the ground were still alive. If the tamer used them again before they were completely dead, then the manor would probably receive quite a bit of damage. Just like a decapitated snake, even if it was just a snake's head, it could still attack due to its nervous inertia. These people naturally knew about these things, and after hearing Silen's explanation, they immediately reported it to Castella. When Castella heard about it, he immediately sent someone to take action. These were all matters related to the Fenier's family. The reason why Silen was interested in the tamer was not just because of his miraculous ability to control sea creatures, but also because of these flying fish. Silen had never seen this kind of flying fish in some of the books regarding the special species of fishes in Sector H. Silen suspected that the tamer or the Wiesen family had secretly bred them through genetic modification. The sticky substance seemed to realize that it had been discovered, so it condensed into a human form and revealed its true appearance. It was only in its human form that it could move more nimbly. A shapeshifter. That tamer was actually an extremely rare shapeshifter. Now that they had finally discovered the tamer's tracks, it was only natural that the Fenier's family would expend a great amount of manpower to deal with him. While the Fenier's family was fighting the tamer, Silen and Hui Mao continued to gather information nearby. Silen discovered that he felt a sense of familiarity from this tamer. Chapter 147. The tamer controlled the undead flying fishes on the ground and other flying fishes to attack the manor, but before that, Castella and Kirk had already finished their preparations. Although there was a problem with the manor's protective shield and it couldn't be activated, the tamer couldn't do anything to the manor for the time being. The repairman in charge of repairing the protective shield estimated that it would take around 10 minutes, and the reinforcements from the Fenier's family from other planets would also arrive around 10 to 15 minutes later. Therefore, if the tamer still didn't make any progress within these 10 minutes, then he wouldn't stand a chance anymore. Firing photon bullets and alloy bullets hit the flying fishes densely, be it flying in the sky or struggling on the ground. Unless these flying fishes were completely dead, the Fenier's family would never stop attacking them. The counterattack of the dying flying fishes would also cause trouble for the defenders, so it was necessary to eliminate any future threats. Castella stood in one of the rooms in the manor and watched the situation. He silently read the reports from his subordinates. Castella didn't need to personally command the battle. He only needed to give a general direction of deployment and leave the rest to the guards and bodyguards in charge. These people were talents that the Fenier's family had painstakingly trained, so they couldn't possibly need Castella's instructions for every battle. The guards certainly cooperated well. At the critical moment, the advantage of the talents nurtured by the great families was revealed. If it were the guards of planet Brown Earth instead, it would definitely be a mess. Because the tamer was a shapeshifter, normal metal bullets and cold weapons had no real effect on him. The Fenier's family guards had chosen some firing energy weapons. To avoid affecting Warsaw's control, they didn't even use any high-energy density weapons. However, judging from the current situation, 10 minutes was something they could hold on for. This tamer didn't expect the other party to discover him so quickly. The entire plan should have been perfect, but first, the echo conches were discovered ahead of time. Then, Mermaid Princess Warsaw, who possessed the bloodline of the New Europeans, came to hold back those giant deep-sea beasts. There was no progress on Tobo's side either. Even if the tamer could control tens of thousands of fishes, his helpers on land were indeed limited. The sea snakes, prawns, and crabs that had come ashore were blocked by a group of Fenier's family members, so they couldn't help the tamer. Knowing that he wouldn't have the slightest chance if this dragged on, the tamer began to grow impatient. "Strange wave spectrum," said Hui Mao, who was squatting nearby and collecting information. Sillin had also vaguely sensed the spectrum, but right now Sillin was paying more attention to the strange sense of familiarity he felt. Celine was sure that he did not know this trainer, but this trainer did give him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. It was just that Celine could not put a finger on this sense of familiarity. This sense of familiarity was real, and not an illusion. Sillin was willing to bet that he had met someone who gave him a similar feeling before. The strange thing was that Sillin's memory was clearly very good, but he couldn't capture this feeling at all. It was like a hazy dot of light flashing and disappearing again and again. He always felt that he could catch it with a raise of his hand, but when he opened his palm, he discovered that there was nothing there. What gave Sillin a sense of familiarity was not the strange spectrum, nor was it the tamer's shape-shifting human race. It was the faint aura the tamer produced. Just where had he seen a similar aura before? Since he couldn't grasp that fleeting feeling, Sillin tossed it aside for now and observed the tamer carefully. However, the more he looked, the stranger Sillin felt. Based on the tamer's current situation, Sillin believed that the tamer wasn't holding back. Otherwise, he would have been poked into a sieve a long time ago. But if the ability this tamer was displaying right now was his peak ability, then it would be strange. Based on the wave spectrum information that Hui Mao transmitted to him, as well as the tamer's aura that Sillin had collected himself, as well as the frequency of changes in the micromagnetic field, through multiple calculations and matrix analysis, the limit of the tamer's field of effect wasn't as wide as he had imagined. The current situation was that in the area outside of the field Sillin had calculated, the shoals of fish were still being controlled to attack the Fenier's family's firepower distribution in a planned and organized manner. In other words, there was still a tamer controlling the shoals of fish in the vicinity, at least in the coastal area. If others knew that Sillin could calculate such a complicated equation in such a short amount of time with just his human brain, they would definitely be shocked to the core. Because a human brain like this was already comparable to a machine. "Wheeze, there's another tamer in the vicinity," Sillin said to Hui Mao, who was beside him. Since Hui Mao could absorb the wave spectrum, he naturally noticed that something was off. After hearing Sillin's words, he changed his direction to search for the other tamer hidden in the vicinity. There were too many disturbances, and the scan was severely affected. Moreover, when Hui Mao used the information of this tamer as a reference to search for the other tamer, he discovered that there was no similar target. He adjusted the parameters to set the general human and the other types of people that Hui Mao had encountered before, and performed a cross-analysis. However, there was still no target within the predicted range. In other words, the hidden tamer might be a race that Hui Mao had never encountered before. It could not be helped. Hui Mao used to live on the original hunting planet, and he had seen very few people. He had only seen more after following the two hunters. However, compared to the other hunters in the sixth team, Hui Mao still had not seen many races. His known data was limited, and it was no wonder that Hui Mao often encountered obstacles. Of course, Hui Mao was also looking forward to seeing more races and other creatures in the future. "I can't find it. The information I have collected is too little. I can't compare it," Hui Mao sighed in frustration. Sillin looked at the situation around him and the sea. He thought for a moment and asked Hui Mao, "Can you capture the wave spectrum of each area?" including those in the air, on land, and on the sea. Sillin was not good at analyzing the wave spectrum of the farther areas, so he could only rely on Huimao. Yes, I can. Huimao was absolutely confident in this. That's good. You don't have to list the race parameters of the shapeshifters to compare. According to the wave spectrum of each area and the changes in the micromagnetic field, use cross-elimination to find the guy's location. After listening to Sillin, Huimao began his second search. Since Huimao and Sillin were next to each other, Huimao could share some information with Sillin. If this chaotic area was placed on a map, then every time Huimao calculated a data, a colored area would shrink. After a few calculations, the colored area that was originally overlapping with the entire map had shrunk a lot. 10 seconds later, Huimao and Sillin were shocked at the same time. Found it. On the analysis map that Huimao had drawn up, there was a colored spot in the coastal area quietly hovering there. Sillin and Huimao quickly rushed over there. Although Sillin and the gray cat had concealed themselves very well, the tamer was obviously extremely vigilant. After realizing that he had been exposed, he swam towards the distant sea with a whoosh. The place where he was previously at, because of the instantaneous force, formed a vacuum area and then a whirlpool. It was obvious that the force was strong. Looking at the guy who rushed out like a cannonball underwater, Sillin and Huimao cursed in their hearts at the same time. Damn, tamers are not normal people. Chapter 148. Sillin and Huimao both charged into the sea to chase after the tamer. Although they had only seen a brief glimpse of the tamer's back, both Sillin and Huimao knew that it wasn't an average human. What average human would grow a few tentacles? And that tamer's speed was like a fish that lived in the sea to begin with. He wasn't any slower than those black marlin fish from before. Since the tamer had fled far out into the sea after realizing that he had been exposed, he no longer cared about those shoals of fish. Therefore, the shoals of fish that had lost control in the coastal region were instantly thrown into chaos. The shoals of fish began attacking each other without the Fenrir's family needing to do anything. Thousands upon thousands of fish of different species and factions began attacking one another. For a time, a shoal war broke out in the coastal region. After the men Castella had sent to keep an eye on Sillin and Huimao reported Sillin's actions, and combined with the chaos in the shoals of fish in the coastal region, Castella guessed that Sillin must have discovered the hidden tamer. He ordered his men to follow behind and pay attention to their whereabouts, but not to act rashly. Kirk ordered some of the men who were stopping the shoals of fish in the coastal region to stop what they were doing and shift their target to the coast to assist in capturing that tamer. After all, the flying fish there were still controlled by that shape-shifting tamer, and the tamer was the key. Sillin and Huimao chased closely after the figure in front of them, but due to the other's physical advantage, they couldn't close the distance in a short amount of time. What surprised Sillin was that the tamer was fleeing in the direction of the giant deep-sea beasts. Above the surface of the sea, Warsaw was still struggling to hold on. Looking at the dark mass of gigantic figures before him, Sillin thought to himself, what is this tamer trying to do? Very soon, Sillin found out why. As the tamer approached, the sea beasts that Warsaw had calmed down began to stir. On the aircraft above the sea, Warsaw's voice suddenly cut off. She took 2 steps back with a pale face, barely managing to steady herself by holding onto the handle next to her. Seeing Warsaw in such a state, the members of the Binger family immediately came forward to support Warsaw, handing her a cup of specially concocted liquid. Warsaw's breathing stabilized after drinking it, but beads of sweat continued to pour from her pale face. Warsaw was almost at her limit after holding on for such a long time. Now that the trainer had suddenly rushed over, she finally could not hold on any longer. After getting someone to take the communicator and connect to Kirk, Warsaw said hurriedly with an unstable breath, "I'm sorry, I can't hold on any longer. A trainer has affected them. I can't hold them back now, Mr. Kirk. You have to respond immediately." Just now, Warsaw discovered that the originally stable sound wave pacification was suddenly cut off at one of the points by an abnormal wave band, which also caused the sea beast corresponding to that point to become restless. If Warsaw was at her peak, she would have been able to handle it, but now it was difficult for her to even speak. If there was one, there would be another. The chain effect caused the other sea beasts to break out of their quiet state one by one. Huasha could no longer suppress them now. It looked like today's matter was not going to end well. The area where the dissolved oxygen had decreased was slowly recovering under the effect of some instruments, and the fish in other areas were also gradually moving towards that direction. The ocean was huge after all, and although the tamers had controlled a portion of the shoals, this portion of the shoal was just a small corner of the entire ocean. It would be much easier if they could lure these deep-sea beasts to the distant sea, but the problem was that these deep-sea beasts seemed to have set their sights on this area of the ocean. If they were to come any closer, Kirk would definitely order his men to activate the weapons of mass destruction. As a person who grew up in Sector H and possessed the blood of European immigrants, Warsaw did not wish to see such a scene. But it was one thing to not wish for it, and what else could she do now? Warsaw ordered her men to fly the spaceplane higher, in case the sea beasts suddenly attacked from below. Back to the topic, Sillin was chasing after the tamer in front of him. After a slight ripple, Huimao shouted, "That guy is controlling the sea beasts." The tamer's figure swiftly passed through the gaps between the giant bodies, and after he passed through, the sea beasts there immediately moved their bodies and blocked the original gap. Sillin had no choice but to find another gap. To these giant sea beasts, a trainer could only be effective at close range, and there could only be one target. Moreover, the trainer could not completely control the sea beasts. He could only create a tendency to make the sea beasts think that way at that moment. Therefore, this kind of control might not be 100% effective for a tamer, but if one of them worked, then it would be an opportunity. Just like the time just now, the sea beasts did not react much when he passed through the gaps earlier, but it worked when he passed through this gap. The sea beasts moved according to the tamer's set thought tendency and blocked off Sillin's pursuit route. If Sillin were to find another gap to chase after them, then he would waste a certain amount of time. On the other hand, the tamer would be able to run further and widen the distance between them. These sea beasts did not pay attention to Sillin and Huimao. As the overlord of a certain domain in the deep sea, their tempers were not very good. Previously, when they gathered here, everyone had nothing to do with each other and did not fight for the time being. Or perhaps before they started fighting, Warsaw appeared. But now, Warsaw no longer had the ability to persevere and pacify them. In addition, the tamer had the intention to anger these sea beasts. As long as one of the deep-sea giant beasts was successfully angered and attacked the other sea beasts, the waves raised by the angry deep-sea giant beasts could form a tsunami and engulf the manor over there. More than 10 deep-sea giant beasts, after the commotion, some half emerged from the surface of the sea, revealing their mountain-like dorsal fins. Some looked like multi-legged sea beasts, flinging their thick and long tentacles out of the sea. The surface of the sea was set off by waves. The shoals of fish in the coastal area were either dead or scattered. The tamer had also been captured. Without the tamer's control, those sea beasts would not attack in an organized manner now. They could not even escape. Kirk withdrew his men and ordered, if those big fellows cross the coastal area's warning line, attack immediately. Before the men sent by Castella to tail Sillin could approach the area, the sea beasts had already gone berserk. It could not be helped. They could only keep a distance away and make plans later. Huimao, who was chasing after the tamer with Sillin, was carelessly whipped by the thick tentacles of a large sea beast next to him. He was flung far away and rolled far away like a spinning top. "Meow my ass. Sillin, you go after them first. I'm going to teach this blind fellow a lesson," said Huimao, who had swam back in the blink of an eye. Before this, Huimao had always felt that he was putting business first. But now that he was being whipped, how could he not be angry? Don't let them get close to the coastal area. Chiochio is still in the manor. If there's a way, lure these big fellows to the distant sea. Sillin knew that Huimao had a sense of propriety, so he did not say much. The tamer in front ran further and further away. Chapter 149. The collisions between the giant beasts created waves that crashed against the shore, scraping away layer after layer of sand and rocks. Kirk was glad that those giant beasts weren't close to the coastal area. If they were, even the manor would be drowned. The roars of the giant beasts were either as deep as thunder or as sharp as a whistle. The roars of the giant beasts caused the people on the shore to feel apprehensive. Just the sound alone was enough to bring about such enormous pressure. This was the difference between the giant beasts of the deep sea and the other fish species. Even that large school of fish could not remain intact under such a loud roar. However, that was only for the other schools of fish and humans. For Hui Mao, it was a completely different story. They were really too arrogant. Hui Mao thought to himself, these fellows are simply too arrogant. No, they don't even have cats in their eyes. Hui Mao didn't transform. His body was still in the form of a kitten, but long knife claws had grown out of his paws. Ordinary knives or guns couldn't pose a threat to these big fellows, but there really weren't many beasts that could remain unscathed under Hui Mao's claws. The sickle-like knife claws sliced through the surface of the giant beast's body, but because the skin was too thick, the insides weren't harmed. Hui Mao narrowed his eyes, and the knife claws on his paws grew even longer. Compared to the 8 knife claws, Hui Mao's tiny body looked a lot smaller. From a certain angle, one really couldn't see Hui Mao. All one could see were the 8 large knife claws waving about. When the skin was finally cut open, the pain transmitted by the nerves in the injured area stimulated the giant beasts. The collisions and attacks became even more intense, and what followed were even bigger waves and all kinds of roars that resounded throughout the world. The fish that didn't manage to escape in time had their internal organs shattered and died. There weren't any other living fish in the vast area of the sea around them. The members of the Feniers family and the Binger family had all retreated to the shore and activated their soundwave defense mechanism. Another thing that was worth rejoicing over was that the manor's protective barrier had been repaired a few minutes earlier. The activated protective barrier was able to resist the soundwave attacks of the sea beasts to a great extent. Although the soundwave attack had been reduced, the people in the manor could still clearly hear those terrifying roars, which made their hearts tremble. Every hair on their bodies trembled along with those roars. Compared to Tobo, Emma, and Rost, Tang Kikyu was much calmer. She was still playing her game with a lollipop in her mouth, which made Tobo and the other 2 look at her strangely. All the monitoring devices in the coastal waters had been disrupted and had lost their functions. Costella and Kirk had no way of knowing what kind of battle was taking place there. One by one, the sea beasts were scratched by Hui Mao, and the number of wounds continued to increase. The roars of the sea beasts became louder and louder, and their movements became more and more frenzied. Their limbs were bitten off, their fins were torn off, and their scales were ripped off. It was a shocking sight to behold. Yell my ass. So noisy. The gray cat was in a bad mood to begin with, so much so that even its whiskers were standing on end. Quarrel my ass. Hui Mao opened his mouth. Amidst the cacophony of roars, a single beast's roar seemed to suppress all other sounds. The bodies of the sea beasts in close proximity were shattered by the tremor, and the monitoring devices in the coastal waters that had lost their functions due to the interference were all shattered into smithereens. At the coastal areas, the people who stayed on land were knocked unconscious by the tremor. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, every control panel malfunctioned, the dashboard and the monitoring panel exploded, and the aircraft was forced to land on the ground. Inside the manor, all the electronic panel screens were in a blurry state, and more than half of the electromagnetic devices were almost paralyzed. This was even after Hui Mao recalled Silin's words and restrained himself a little. If he had gone all out, none of the equipment in the manor would have survived. What on earth happened? That was what the people on the shore were thinking, and it was also the reason why they were restless and emotionally unstable. Ever since they arrived on planet Zafia, they had never encountered such a situation. Warsaw and the other European newbies felt a wave of pressure, and the captured tamer was almost in a daze right now. Warsaw and the tamer, who were familiar with the giant deep-sea beasts, knew that the abilities of the giant deep-sea beasts on this planet should not have reached such a level. Although such a behemoth was also the ruler of the deep sea on this planet, If they were to be compared to the few rank B planets in Sector H whose habitability was almost entirely ocean, then the giant deep-sea beasts of planet Zafia could only be considered as minions that went through the motions. Moreover, the owner of the voice that paralyzed the electromagnetic system definitely had abilities that rivaled those true overlords. At first, Hui Mao wanted to forcefully chase these fellows to the distant sea, but he didn't expect that after a moment of venting his anger, these big fellows would obediently slip away to the distant sea as if they had seen their natural enemy. For these big fellows, their old territory was the only place that gave them a sense of security. That was why they were returning to their respective places now. Watching the big sea beasts dragging their maimed bodies and slipping away, Hui Mao shook his ears and withdrew his claws. Seeing that no one was sent over from the shore, he swam towards the distant sea as well. He was going to find Sillin, who was chasing after the tamer. Speaking of which, Sillin had chased after the tamer for a while. At first, the distance between the two parties didn't close by much, and the tamer didn't manage to shake off Sillin either. Then, the tamer's stamina slowly decreased. Chasing the shoals had already used up a portion of his strength, and now that he was running away with all his might, his stamina was gradually running out. However, just as Sillin was closing the distance between the two parties, a few sharp thorns suddenly shot towards him from the front. They actually have companions. As I thought, there are more than two tamers. Sillin evaded the sharp thorns, but what followed were rounds and rounds of attacks. There was also the shoal of black marlin that swam towards him at high speed, as well as other fish that were faster than him. The large shoal of fish obstructed Sillin's path of pursuit. By the time Sillin broke through the shoal of fish, the tamer was already gone. Sillin didn't continue his pursuit. Since another tamer had appeared, then there might be a fourth, a fifth, or even more. For so many tamers that were regarded as rare antiques to appear all of a sudden, just who did the Fenier's family offend? Regardless of who the Fenier's family had offended, Sillin didn't want to investigate any further. The current situation was one where he was alone. Since the other party was able to mobilize so many tamers, then their hidden strength was definitely not limited to this. No matter what, this was a matter between the Fenier's family and the Binger family. Sillin didn't want to poke his nose into other people's business. The twists and turns between the great families were too complicated. Previously, he was too curious about the tamers, and it was fortunate that he had encountered one. If he could capture one and exchange it with the Fenier's family, then it seemed that he should stop now. Sillin knew his own limits. It was obvious that the other party was prepared. If he continued to investigate further, not only would he not be able to resist them with his individual strength, he might even suffer a great loss. He turned around and decisively swam back. He didn't swim far before Sillin bumped into Hui Mao, who was chasing after him. Hui Mao looked at Sillin and didn't see the tamer. You lost him? He has companions to receive him. There's nothing we can do. Sillin surfaced and looked at the sky. It seemed to be getting late. Let's go back to the manor. All right, let's go back. Those big fellows have all run away. I only roared once. Hui Mao snorted. He could hear the smugness in his voice. Don't be so arrogant. Have you been discovered? Of course not. Because of the battle between the giant beasts, there was no one in the sea at that time. They had all escaped to the shore. Moreover, all the surveillance cameras in the surroundings have been destroyed. With those big fellows acting as cover, there's no way we would have been discovered. Hui Mao said with certainty. That's good. Let's go back. While you're at it, think of a way to extort more money from that old fox, Castella. Of course. We have to ask for more compensation no matter what. Oh right, I saw that there's dried fish on the manor's dining table. I'll ask for more when we get back to the manor. Extort more money when the opportunity presented itself. This was the philosophy that Diaz had instilled in him. In fact, before Sillin could even open his mouth, Castella had already taken the initiative to express that he would increase the reward. Sillin's contribution in capturing the Vezin family's shapeshifter tamer could not go unnoticed, even if Sillin did not participate in the capture. Other than that, although Sillin did not manage to capture another tamer, He had at least obtained one piece of information. There were at least 3 tamers involved in this operation, and there might even be more. After this ruckus, Costella, Kirk, and the others still had many things to handle. Warsaw and the others, on the other hand, were conflicted about which type of deep-sea giant beast had let out that absolutely oppressive roar at the end. Everyone was very busy. However, Sillin could not care less. After he received the receipt signed by Costella, he returned to his room. He had overused his brain today. Let's take a nap first. Tang Qiuqiu was still at her post, but there was not much for her to do at the moment. The bodyguards around her were keeping a close eye on Tobo. On the other side of planet Zafia, on the surface of the sea that no one had noticed, a few figures were gathered there. One of them was the tamer that Sillin had been pursuing. These people were scattered all over the place, commanding shoals of fish to attack the coastal areas and the Fenier's family's underwater base. They held back the others so that they could not provide reinforcements to the manor. Warsaw and Costella would never have imagined that there would be so many tamers hidden on this planet. Wiesen's men failed. If they failed, so be it. We've already expected it. Do they think they can turn the tables with trash like them? Yeah, it's fine as long as our mission is completed. Have you finished processing the mission summary? If you're done, hand it over. I have to report to the master as soon as possible. Ouch, my kidneys are hurting. Another mission summary report? I hate this stuff. My nerve endings are slow to react to this. It's fine. You can keep delaying it. I don't want to be stripped by the master and thrown into an aquarium for people to see. These people were obviously not from the Wiesen family. It was just as Costella had thought. There was indeed a 4th force involved. However, who was the master these people were talking about? Chapter 150. In Sector H's Sector A, there was a planet more than 5 times larger than planet Zafia, planet Auroch. In Sector H's sector language, Auroch meant eternal. 50% of the planet's surface was made up of ocean, its habitability was at rank A, and its terrestrial environment was extremely good. Planet Auroch was also the capital of Sector H, and it controlled the politics, business, education, media, and so on of Sector H. The great families all had branches there. It was obvious how important the planet was in Sector H. In a certain 1,000-meter-tall tower in one of the cities on planet Auroch. The height of this tower really wasn't much on this planet. There were a lot of buildings taller than this tower in the city cluster, but no one on this planet would ignore this tower. In fact, this not-so-great tower definitely ranked in the top 3 in terms of influence on the entire planet Auroch. The tower took up a lot of space, and it looked very grand. From time to time, flying cars, transport planes, and so on would stop and go here. It was a busy sight. Right now, inside a certain upper floor of this tower, a little old man, who was less than 160 centimeters tall, with a head full of gray hair that was combed into a thin braid at the back of his head, walked forward calmly, step by step, with his hands clasped behind his back. There was a door in front of him, and there were a few guards by the door. They were fooling around there. When they saw the little old man, the few of them immediately retracted their smiles and stood at attention. Their previously smiling faces tightened into a look of paralysis. The aura around them also quickly changed from the casual attitude they had earlier to one of solemnity. "Is the young master inside?" the little old man asked. The little old man's tone was calm, and one could even feel the friendliness and casualness in it. However, the guards at the door did not look relaxed at all. They still stood as straight as before, and faintly exuded an intimidating aura. "Yes, the young master is taking an afternoon nap," one of them answered in a sonorous and forceful voice. The little old man looked at the color of the sky outside. "It's almost evening now, isn't it? An afternoon nap?" However, the little old man did not dwell on this issue. He looked at the few people whose muscles were stretched taut, and his eyes swept over them from top to bottom like a scanner, as if he could see inside. The shape of your facial muscles is very well tightened. Make your eyes sharper and adjust your posture slightly. You can't be stiff. Good, very good. In the future, when someone comes over, you should maintain this posture. Be full of vigor and pull up some superficial points. If you continue to follow young master like that, all your superficial points will be deducted. Also, take out the things in your pockets. The suit isn't for you to keep snacks in. One had to know that one's salary was directly proportional to their points. The more points they deducted, the less their salary would be. When they heard this, their gazes became even sharper. After all, it was this little old man who was paying the salary. The little old man nodded in satisfaction. After entering the password and verification information, he pushed the door open and walked in. After the little old man went in, the few people outside the door resumed their previous playful state. However, they still listened to the little old man's words and took out the snacks in their pockets and placed them in a cabinet not far away. It was a spacious office. Upon entering, one could see a large office desk, bookshelves, a filing desk, and a floor-to-ceiling aquarium next to it. Inside, there were all kinds of strange-looking fish swimming around, adding quite a bit of liveliness to the office. The little old man did not even look at the situation inside the office and walked straight to a small door at the side of the office. There was a resting room there. Unlike the resting rooms in other offices, this resting room was very large, even larger than the offices outside. There were wine cabinets, a bar counter, video cameras, game consoles, storage cabinets, and more. There was even a large bed. It was obvious that the owner of this place was someone who knew how to enjoy life. However, the most eye-catching thing in this resting room was definitely the sofa. It was a shell-shaped sofa, a sofa that had been hollowed out and then processed. The value of this sofa alone was comparable to that of a spaceship. If a beautiful woman was lying inside this shell-shaped sofa, it would naturally be more aesthetically pleasing. However, the truth was that it was a man lying on it, and this man was wearing a singlet. His hair was messy like a chicken's nest, and he was wearing large underpants. There was even a slipper with a suspicious substance stuck to his foot. He was napping on the high-end shell-shaped sofa without any sleeping posture to speak of. His saliva flowed along the soft cushion of the sofa all the way to the floor, forming a large puddle. The little old man was already used to the situation in front of him. He was even satisfied that this person was not snoring today. However, when his gaze fell on the slipper hanging from this person's foot, his eyebrows could not help but twitch. He remembered that he had just thrown this pair of slippers into the sea hundreds of kilometers away yesterday. Shaking his head with a bitter smile, the little old man walked over. He did not call out, but instead pressed a button on the shell cover of the shell-shaped sofa. The two petal-like shells of the shell-shaped sofa that were originally open suddenly closed, but due to the irregular sleeping posture of the person on the sofa, the legs and one arm that were resting on the edge of the sofa were clamped. If it was a normal person, they would have been clamped into several pieces. However, the person on the sofa was still perfectly fine and did not react at all. Pressing again, the shell opened and closed again. Still no reaction. Pressing again. Pressing again. It was not until the 10th time that the person on the sofa finally moved. Only then did the little old man retract his finger from the button. The person on the sofa slowly sat up, blinked in confusion, scratched his hair that was like a chicken's nest, wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand, and wiped it on his singlet. His gaze turned to the little old man, and when he saw who it was, he curled his lips and raised his foot to kick a button next to the sofa. Other people used their hands to press the button, but this young master habitually kicked it with his foot. Because his legs were longer than his arms, it saved him a lot of trouble. He did not need to move his butt within a short distance, so he was too lazy to even move a single step. Warm soup, freshly roasted meat products, and mineral nutrient solution that had already been poured into a cup were placed neatly on a plate by the robot and brought to the dining table that had popped up in front of the sofa. Looking at the person who raised his hand lazily to pick up the cutlery to eat, the little old man did not make a sound, because he knew that this young master would want to eat once he woke up. If they were to talk before he finished eating, he would toss out one word after another, not bothering to remember anything that was said. After he finished eating, this young master raised his eyelids to look at the person who had come. What is it now? The people from planet Zaphia sent news that Vision's men failed. There's no need to say anything about it. The person on the sofa put down the cup and looked at the little old man. I say, Mr. Brzett, can I call you Bear Grylls? You woke me up from my sweet dreams just because of this? I don't deserve to be called Bear Grylls. The old man will throw me into the deep sea to feed the giant beasts. Brzett laughed, but then he withdrew his smile. Pescado has been discovered, and the others are also inclined to be exposed. At the very least, Fenrir's men already know that a fourth force has intervened. Of course, they don't know that it's our side. Oh! The person on the sofa spun his wine cup. This is unexpected. To think that Pescado would be exposed with his abilities. The name Pescado meant swimming fish, in the sector language of Sector H. When Pescado was hidden in a shoal of fish, even a scanner would have a hard time distinguishing him from the shoal of fish. If Costella and Kirk had guessed that there was another tamer after the fact, then it wouldn't be strange. After all, neither of them were simple characters, and they would be able to figure it out after a careful analysis. But the problem was that Pescado had been discovered, and his early exposure had disrupted some of their original plans. Do you want them to return? The little old man asked. Of course. Since they were discovered so quickly, there's not much use for them to stay on planet Zafia. Cancel the follow-up operations and let them return. All right. After a pause, Brzett said again, according to the information they sent back in the mission summary report, the one who discovered Pescado wasn't a member of the Fenrir's family, but a young man called Silin. The person who was originally lying lazily on the sofa and listening to Brzett's report spat out a mouthful of water. He was so excited that he kicked over the dining table in front of him. After a series of clanking sounds, the person ignored the stains splashed on his body and jumped off the sofa. He ran in front of Brzett and looked him straight in the eye. He said almost word by word, "Tell me again. What is the name of the person who discovered Pescado?" "Young master, according to the information we received, his name is Silin, and he's about 20 years old. Fuck his grandpa." "Young Master Lung, please pay attention to your manners." Brzett had no choice but to remind him. However, it seemed like how long had it been since his young master had cursed like this ever since he took over the work here? That's right, this person wearing a singlet and large underpants with absolutely no image to speak of was young Master Andrira Lung. When they left Seven Lights back then, the ones who wanted to drag Silin out and give him a good beating the most were Lung and Knight. They hadn't heard from Silin for almost 3 years, so it would be strange if they weren't excited when they suddenly heard his name. In young Master Lung's eyes, etiquette, demeanor, and whatnot were all for outsiders to see. Since there were no outsiders now, then what was the point of etiquette? Lung spun a few times on the spot and asked again, "Are there any images?" "Yes, but there aren't many. Also, the time is too short, so we couldn't find any detailed information about that Silin. We only know that he met Costella at Fenrir's family's little garden at Sector X." Brzett brought up the image and said, "The fact that Silin and Tangchocho were Vanguard Division 6 was only known by Costella and a few other core figures. No one else knew about it." Lung frowned and stared for a long while before pointing at the person on the image Brzett brought up. "Who's that dumb-looking idiot over there?" "He's Silin," Brzett answered. Lung's expression was odd. Did that guy go for a full plastic surgery? What a waste, his appearance is getting worse and worse, and he looks a lot more robust. I can't tell just from the image, but I can recognize him in person. However, the only person who had the ability to discover Pescado, also known as Silin, was probably the one in his memory. After a moment of silence, Lung said to Brzett, "Didn't you say a few days ago that there's a planet in Sector T that you're going to develop jointly with another family? Call Fenrir's people over and discuss the terms of the partnership." "But young master, you've already confirmed the House of Evigo as the partner yesterday." "Swap it out. We haven't signed the contract yet, right? There's another partnership in 10 days. At most, we'll give priority to Evigo as compensation." Lung said unconcernedly. "All right, I'll contact Kirk immediately." After Brzett left, Lung started rummaging through one of the storage cabinets in the room. He remembered that he bought a pair of boxing gloves last year. When they left Seven Lights, Lung and Nate had agreed that the next time they saw Sillin, they would first kick him like this, then that, and then give him a good beating. Chapter 151. Inside the manor on planet Zafia, Kirk finally had some free time after he was done with his business. He laid down and took a short nap. This incident gave Kirk a wake-up call. He had always underestimated a tamer's abilities. No matter how limited a single tamer's abilities were, at the very least, they had put the Fenier's family in a very passive position. The prawns and crabs that should have been served to the dining table could paralyze their protective shield for a dozen or so minutes. A dozen or so minutes was enough to accomplish a lot of things. For those people who were fighting against the shoals, even a second was torture, much less a dozen or so minutes. There was also the 3 crabs in Tobo's room. No one knew how far they could go. Fortunately, the little hunter girl had killed them at the first sign of trouble. Another thing worth rejoicing over was that the Binger family had sent over this time was the mermaid princess Warsaw. Otherwise, they would probably have to resort to weapons of mass destruction to end the battle against that many shoals and a dozen or so giant deep-sea beasts. Normally, a family would be very reluctant to use weapons of mass destruction on a planet that had been set up as a base in a large sector. Who would be willing to set off cannons in front of their home unless it was absolutely necessary? Sector H was a sector dominated by the sea, and could not be measured by the standards of other sectors. All of planet Zafia's defense systems must be upgraded and redeployed strategically. Kirk thought as he relaxed and rested. Who knew that his communicator would ring just as he entered the state, and it was the communicator exclusive for official business. What is it? Boss, Andrias Berzet is requesting a call. Kirk's heart skipped a beat. Berzet? Kirk knew of that inconspicuous little old man. There was no one on planet Auroch who did not know of that little old man. He was the smiling tiger of the Andrias family. God knows how many people had died under the fangs of this smiling tiger. To be honest, Kirk really did not want to tangle with the Andrias family right now. The Andrias family's influence in Sector H was ranked in the top 3 of the large sector, and they were even more influential than the Fenier's family and the Binger family who had made their fortune here in the first place. However, their previous few collaborations had all fallen through without any good results. But why did this old man Berzet come looking for him of his own accord? Speaking of which, Sillin hadn't woken up since he returned to his guest room and fell asleep. In his dream, his consciousness controlled the analysis of the data, and he dissected the tamer's control methods and spectra in depth. He had to admit that the tamer was not simple. Every change in frequency was a command, and this command had to be accepted and understood by the school of fishes, or it could lead to a tendency in their thinking. The audio spectrum was like a password that transmitted information. It was quite complicated. At least, Sillin could not decipher the password with the information he had collected. Sillin opened his eyes and stretched. He looked at Hui Mao, who was curled into a ball and sleeping soundly, and got out of bed. "I'm hungry. Let's find something to eat." After comforting his stomach, Sillin went to look for Tang Qiuqiu. However, Tang Qiuqiu did not seem to be stressed at all. She was still playing her game. She ignored Tobo and the others who took the initiative to talk to her. He was in the middle of clearing the stage, so how could he have the time to care about unrelated people? When he returned to the guest room, Sillin noticed that Costella was already waiting inside. Hui Mao was still asleep, completely ignoring Costella. "What's the matter that requires your presence?" Sillin smiled. "There's something I need to explain. We're going to Sector H's capital planet, Auroch first. Kirk is going there to discuss a contract, and I need to go there to take a look. When the contract is done, we'll depart for Sector F directly from planet Auroch." "Sure, I have no objections. We can also visit Sector H's capital Auroch while we're at it." "That's good. It's a bit of an emergency, so we'll depart tomorrow." "All right." Sillin had nothing to pack anyway. He could leave whenever he was notified. He had heard of Auroch Sector's great name since a long time ago, but he had never gone there personally. This was a good opportunity, and the Fenier's family would take care of his food and lodging. Why not? After Costella left, Huimao opened his eyes, stuck out his butt and stretched his waist. He shook his fur and jumped onto the table. There was a dried fish that Sillin had just brought back. Sillin, I overheard Kirk's conversation on the communicator just now. Huimao said while chewing on the dried fish. What's the important matter? Sillin sat down on the recliner, opened a book and said. Cooperation, nothing important. But I heard another family name. This time the Feniers family is going to discuss cooperation with the Andryra family. Kirk called them Berzet, and judging from his voice, he sounds like an old man. Huimao was calm, but Sillin almost flipped off the recliner. His face twitched again and again. The Andryra family, although he didn't want to meet them right now, Sillin couldn't just leave Tang Kakikiu alone. Moreover, he had already agreed to go with them. Sai, never mind. I'll have to face them sooner or later. But I might not run into them. After all, the Andryra family had so many properties. If they did meet, I wonder if they would fight. There was no way Sillin could imagine that young Master Lung had already started preparing his boxing gloves. Seeing Sillin's silence, Huimao asked, What are you thinking about? Sillin smiled slightly, I'm thinking of a few friends. Friends? Which hunter regiment? Are they as famous as Vanguard? Huimao tilted his head and asked. Huimao couldn't be blamed for thinking like this. After all, the people Huimao had met since he left hunting planet TH-036 were all hunters. Families like the Feniers family were financiers, and people like Poison Fong were prey to be hunted. Therefore, those who could be considered friends should all be hunters. No, they're not hunters. Not hunters? Sillin nodded. Although I haven't known them for long, they are very worthy of deep friendship. He scratched Huimao's chin and slowly told him some of the things that happened in Seven Lights. Early the next morning, the group boarded the starship and headed towards Planet Auroch. Looking at the information regarding Planet Auroch in his hands, Sillin felt a little complicated. The big business families Andryra, Duance, Binger, Feniers, Furlan and so on all had branches on this planet. There were a lot of familiar families. However, the current Sillin had changed greatly compared to 3 years ago. They might not be able to recognize him even if he were to stand in front of them. There were a few huge spaceports outside of Planet Auroch, and all starships were docked inside. All spaceships that entered the planet also had to go through strict inspection to prevent them from bringing in infectious viruses and parasites. Spaceships without a spaceship pass were not allowed to enter the planet. Big families like the Feniers family had all applied for the relevant pass. Those who did not have the qualifications to apply for a pass could only enter the planet on a transport plane arranged by the government. There was also a military garrison on the planet, so relatively speaking, the planet's public security was pretty good on the surface. But in the dark, there were bound to be many turbulent waves. Who on this planet didn't have a few tricks up their sleeves? If they couldn't do it in the light, they would try to do it in the dark. There were definitely a lot of people who were thrown into the sea to feed the fish every day. After the starship was docked at the spaceport, it was handed over to the Feniers family's guards at the spaceport to manage and protect it. The others then transferred to spaceships and entered the planet. The Feniers family's branch here had a spaceship's landing area. Before Kirk and the other spaceships arrived, the other spaceships and planes on the field had already made way for them. There were already some high-ranking managers in the tall building belonging to the Feniers family who came out to greet them, and the bodyguards and guards took their respective positions. Under the grand welcome, Kirk, Costella and the others entered the tall building. Just like before, Costella had someone arrange a guest room for Sillin. After a simple tidying up, under Huimao's urging, Sillin bade farewell to Steele and left the building. Costella was probably busy right now and could not find anyone, so he had Steele pass the message on his behalf. Truth be told, Tang Kakikiu really wanted to come out and play as well, but because she had a mission to complete, and Tobo had been told that he was not allowed to leave the building, she could only play games inside. However, it was only when Sillin promised to bring her sweets that Tang Kakikiu felt a little more balanced. Where are we going first? Sillin opened the map of Planet Auroch. Let's go to the Eternal Square. That place is the biggest. Hui Mao patted a spot on the map with his paw and said, "All right, let's go to the Eternal Square first." They hailed a flying car and entered the high-speed passage. One man and one cat headed towards the Eternal Square. The Eternal Square was the biggest square on planet Auroch. It was not located in the business district, and it was not in the territory of the big business families. The closest building to the Eternal Square was the towering twin towers of Sector H's United Government. If one had to name the most attractive thing in the Eternal Square, then it would definitely be the statue of Sea God. Beneath the giant statue, everyone was as small as an ant. Standing on the square and looking at the giant statue at the center of the square, Hui Mao asked, "Why does Sea God look like a human?" "Because this statue was made by a human, and humans have always been self-centered." Silin answered. "The dolphins around him are so dumb. Because it's a statue, not a living one." "Why is he holding a fork? Is it to stab a fish?" "That's called a trident." "Let's go to the statue. I'm going to climb onto Sea God's head." Silin felt a gaze lingering on him. He looked back. There was a person sitting under the statue. He wore a singlet, beach pants, flip-flops, a pair of brown glasses that almost covered half his face, and a pair of boxing gloves the size of pumpkins on each of his hands. Actually, they were meant for King Kong, weren't they? The two large boxing gloves he wore on his hands collided with each other, producing banging sounds. Lung watched the approaching person through the brown glasses. He wasn't sure before, but when Silin looked over, Lung knew that this was the guy who played dead. Silin was a little surprised. He didn't expect to run into Lung here. He thought that even if he did, it would be in the business district. "Silin?" Lung said. Although it was a questioning tone, there was certainty in his voice. Silin didn't deny it. He knew that Lung had recognized him, so he nodded with a smile. "Long time no see." Lung stood up and cracked his neck. Without another word, he kicked Silin and punched him with two big fists. Silin, on behalf of Knight, on behalf of C.I. Jincheng, on behalf of BPT, on behalf of Hard, on behalf of Surd, on behalf of Pride, on behalf of Sir Mo, on behalf of everyone in Seven Lights, I'm going to beat you up. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.